Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Barbara Maybe Abel. There are books and films that help teach ways to confront criminals and appropriate behavior during kidnappings or critical situations. However, reading about these scenarios and actually experiencing them are two different things. Barbara Abel fully realized this when one of the most dangerous criminals in the U.S. showed up at her doorstep. On November 14, 1974, a scared Dale ran to his neighbor's house and began knocking frantically on the door. When the neighbor opened it, he found the boy covered in blood with strange marks on his ankles. Dale explained that the marks were from ropes used by an unknown man who had tied him and his Aunt Beverly while his mother, Barbara, was kidnapped. The neighbor quickly called 911. When the police arrived at the Abel family's home, it looked like a crime scene. There was blood everywhere, and the neighbor noted that Barbara's car was missing, along with her. Dale assisted the detectives by providing details about his mother, 31-year-old Barbara Maybe Abel, who had a twin sister named Beverly, who had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. The twin sisters shared a deep bond from childhood. Barbara consistently supported and cared for Beverly. As they grew older, their relationship became stronger, with Barbara always striving to improve Beverly's quality of life and help her manage daily challenges. Barbara was smart, cheerful, and serious when necessary. After their father passed away, young Barbara took on many household responsibilities to help her mother. Throughout her life, she maintained a positive outlook and supported her loved ones during tough times. In April 1968, she gave birth to her son, Dale, and felt immense joy as a new mother. However, she soon faced challenges, primarily due to her breakup with the baby's father. Their disagreements had begun about a year before Dale was born. Although they hoped Dale would help resolve their issues, things only got worse. Ultimately, Barbara chose to raise her son as a single mother, later reflecting that this was the right decision for both of them, as it allowed her to create a stable environment for herself and her child. Unfortunately, the family faced a series of challenges. In May 1974, their mother passed away from an illness, leaving them in shock. It felt as if their world had collapsed. Their family had always been very close, so their mother's death deeply affected both Barbara and Beverly. Despite their grief, they tried to maintain a normal environment for the younger generation. Barbara worked diligently, writing and taking a job at a radio station, while Beverly managed household chores. They lived in a modest home in Palm Beach, Florida, and surrounded 6-year-old Dale with love and care, gradually recovering from this tragedy. On November 14, 1974, it seemed like an ordinary day for the Abel family. Beverly assisted Barbara in getting ready for work, and Dale was preparing for school. After dropping Dale off, Barbara went to the radio station where she worked as a news editor. Around noon, she tried to call Beverly, who was at home, but there was no answer. This was strange because Beverly never missed calls. She was always eager to talk, but this time she didn't even call back. Initially, Barbara thought her sister might have fallen asleep and didn't think much of it, so she continued with her work. After leaving the radio station around 5 p.m., she picked up Dale and headed home, expecting to see her sister there. As soon as they entered, she called Beverly, but there was no answer. Barbara asked her son to find his aunt, thinking she might have been listening to music and hadn't heard them come home. While Barbara went to the kitchen, she felt a sudden and intense fear that sent a chill down her spine. It was a deep, instinctual dread, and in that moment, she heard a voice say, "Don't turn around or I'll attack." Just then, her son Dale rushed into the kitchen and said that his aunt was in the bedroom and bleeding. When Barbara turned around, she saw a man pointing a weapon at her and Dale. Staying calm, she told the intruder that she needed to see her twin sister because she was worried about her. This was a risky move, but it seemed to impress the man, who agreed to let her see her sister. With the weapon still aimed at them, Barbara and Dale cautiously walked toward the bedroom, trying to keep Dale away from the armed man. Beverly was in the bedroom, lying on the bed with a gag in her mouth, crying. Barbara kissed her sister and whispered that everything would be all right. Barbara noticed that Beverly was undressed under the blanket. Unable to hold back her feelings, she confronted the attacker, questioning whether he had abused Beverly. He responded with laughter, claiming he had attempted to assault Beverly but had failed. His cruel smile and taunting words sent another chill down Barbara's spine. Following this, she tried to bribe the assailant. She revealed that she had a significant amount of money at home and was willing to give him her car keys. In return, she pleaded with him to leave them alone and not to harm them. The stranger, however, expressed his desire to take her child and reach for the boy. Barbara firmly declared that she would never give up her son and instead offered to take Dale's place. The man agreed. The assailant identified himself as Paul John Knowles and claimed he had just escaped from prison, stating he had no plans to return. He warned Barbara that he wouldn't harm her as long as she followed his orders exactly. Although Barbara knew he was lying and likely wouldn't let her go easily, she felt she had no good options left. Her primary concern was the safety of her son and her injured sister, who needed help. However, Paul was determined to keep them as hostages to buy time for his escape. He tightly bound Dale's and Beverly's hands and feet on the bed. Barbara was horrified at the thought of leaving her loved ones in such a vulnerable state, but she realized that any resistance could endanger their lives. Throughout this terrifying situation, she remained calm, speaking to her family as if everything was normal, reassuring them that it would all be over soon and that they would be all right. This approach worked. She managed to soothe her child and keep the kidnapper from becoming agitated. Barbara emphasized that they should not provoke Paul, as she had no way of knowing his true intentions. Her goal was to lead the attacker far away from her home and loved ones, then find a way to escape and alert the authorities. Paul accepted the offered money and car keys. He pointed the weapon at Barbara, then got into the car and drove away. Throughout this time, Barbara was primarily concerned about her family. More than 30 minutes later, Dale escaped and sought help. The police responded to the call. They found an abandoned car near the house, which was the vehicle used by the kidnapper. The car was registered in one state, but its license plate had been stolen from another location. Investigations revealed that the car had been stolen from a man named William Bates a couple of months earlier. Eventually, William's body was discovered, strangled, in Ohio. Inside the car's glove compartment, detectives discovered numerous credit cards and insurance policies, the majority of which belonged to Carswell Carr. The man had become a victim of a double homicide along with his 15-year-old daughter, Amanda, just days before Barbara's kidnapping. The tragedy at the Carr home in Milledgeville, Georgia, was one of the most horrifying scenes the investigators had ever witnessed. A 15-year-old girl had been brutally strangled, and her father had suffered around 30 stab wounds. It was evident that the perpetrator was a dangerous individual, prepared to kill anyone who interfered. On November 6, 1974, the Carr home, located almost 7 kilometers from where Barbara lived, was found ransacked. Inside the car, discovered near the home of Barbara, a will belonging to a man named Paul John Knowles was also found. Once law enforcement checked their database, they identified Paul as an escaped serial killer. Authorities linked him to at least 35 murders across the United States. He traveled aimlessly, leaving behind trails of blood and bodies, completely indifferent to the consequences of his actions. He selected his victims randomly, unlike most psychopaths, who usually target a specific type. He took lives with the same pleasure, whether the victim was a child or an adult. He left behind a lot of evidence, but there were no hints about his next actions. Meanwhile, Barbara and Paul were driving Barbara's car when he discovered he was wanted by the police. He forced Barbara to change the radio station. She complied and noticed that he seemed to expect the news to be on all channels, while others remained quiet, which frustrated him. At that moment, she was still unaware of his true nature. Suddenly, he confessed to having killed several people. This made Barbara uncomfortable, so she tried to change the topic to distract him from his violent past by discussing the weather, movies, or anything unrelated. Despite her attempts, he continued to casually mention his killings. Barbara began to act flirtatiously, realizing that her femininity might be her only chance for escape. Barbara decided to try to win him over. She called him sweet and offered him a cigarette. When Paul asked why she was being so nice, Barbara replied that she didn't believe he was a bad person, and even said he reminded her of the famous actor Robert Redford. This seemed to work. After the comparison, Paul became much more responsive, calm, and easier to talk to. They continued their conversation as if nothing bad had happened, as if they were simply on a date. Paul asked Barbara what she did for a living. She replied that she was a news editor on the radio and dreamed of writing a book. This excited Paul, who seemed genuinely interested in her ambitions, especially the idea that she could write a book about him. He expressed a desire to become famous, mentioning that he wanted the book's proceeds to go to his mother, but he didn't specify how he planned to achieve that fame. He repeatedly claimed to have killed many times. Although she was terrified, Barbara tried to hide her fear and remain calm. At one point, she realized that her only chance to escape was to push Paul out of the moving car, but she couldn't summon the strength or courage to do it. Barbara understood that if the investigators discovered who she was with, they would likely conclude that she was already dead. Paul was a ruthless predator with an insatiable thirst for killing. He was unpredictable and armed, which made him extremely dangerous. The most frightening aspect was that they were in an unknown location, and she had no idea where Paul was taking her. The detectives discovered that he was traveling between different states, often switching cars, and that his attacks consistently resulted in death. Occasionally, he took hostages, all of whom ended up dead. The chances of Barbara surviving her abduction were deemed very slim, but her family and friends refused to give up hope. They believed she could still be found alive. Law enforcement officials realized they had to act quickly because with every minute that passed, the likelihood of rescuing Barbara decreased. A search perimeter was set up on the roads in West Palm Beach, along with checkpoints. Authorities announced plans to intercept the suspect, Paul, focusing on Barbara's distinctive golden vehicle. However, detectives were unaware that they were too late. Paul had already taken Barbara beyond the checkpoints. Paul arrived with Barbara at a motel in Fort Pierce, about 100 kilometers from the scene of the abduction. He intended to rest there for the night and had no plans to release Barbara. To avoid suspicion, they registered as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, pretending to be on their honeymoon. Barbara felt that the hotel receptionist was suspicious of them based on her gaze. Meanwhile, she knew that Paul was carrying a weapon at his waist. To allay the receptionist's suspicions, Barbara embraced Paul and acted like a loving wife. This successfully convinced the administrator, who then handed them the key to the room. As soon as they entered the room, Paul ordered Barbara to take off her clothes. Barbara felt scared and protested, saying she was too tired, but Paul ignored her and insisted she comply. While the criminal was trying to do his dirty deed, she thought of everything that came to mind about her son and sister in order to detach herself from what was happening, but at first, she couldn't manage it. Paul grew frustrated and angry, becoming aggressive toward her. Sensing his loss of control, Barbara calmly asked him what he was trying to accomplish, which helped ease his anger momentarily. However, he later abused her. At one point, he shared with her that he had two personalities, referring to them as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, explaining his frequent mood changes. Barbara found it hard to predict his rapid shifts in temperament. After a brief period of calm, Paul suddenly ripped the bed sheets, tied Barbara up with them, and threw her onto the bed before turning on the television. Exhausted both mentally and physically, she eventually fell asleep. In her dreams, Barbara saw her deceased mother, who reassured her that everything would be fine. At that moment, Barbara understood it was a sign and resolved to do whatever it took to save herself. While she slept, she heard news reports and saw Paul intently watching a broadcast that displayed her photographs alongside those of Paul, his identity had already been established. They also reported on other crimes committed by Paul that were known at that time. Barbara was horrified. She understood that her chances of rescue were extremely low. Meanwhile, Paul reveled in the attention he was receiving from the media. Barbara recognized that he desperately wanted to become famous. Later, Paul went to sleep, tying his leg to Barbara's to prevent her from escaping. By November 15, the police still had no leads on her whereabouts. The search for Paul had escalated to a national scale. Headlines in all newspapers and on television shouted that the most dangerous criminal in the country was killing again. Barbara woke up in the morning next to Paul. She had barely slept the entire night, terrified to be tied to one of America's most wanted criminals. Paul took her to the nearest diner for breakfast. While he eagerly devoured scrambled eggs, toast, pancakes, and orange juice, Barbara couldn't eat anything. She glanced around nervously, hoping someone would recognize her, while also looking for ways to escape. However, she quickly noticed that Paul's weapon was aimed at her. He warned her not to make any sudden movements. To her dismay, she realized that no one seemed to recognize them, despite the extensive news coverage and radio alerts. Barbara understood that she couldn't rely on anyone for help. She was too scared to scream or ask for assistance, fearing it would only worsen her situation. She decided to keep playing her role, believing it would save her life. She buried her face in the plate and had a small breakfast. Afterward, Paul and Barbara returned to the motel, where he abused her again. Initially, she fought back, which only fueled his anger. At one point, Barbara feared for her life, believing he might not stop in his rage. However, she managed to save herself once more by employing her understanding and psychological tactics. She stayed calm, engaged him in conversation, and successfully avoided a violent outcome for the second time. During their dialogue, Paul mentioned that he wanted to get to know Barbara before everything changed, clearly referring to his criminal actions. Thus, she realized that she had found a way to connect with him, and her chances of a positive outcome immediately increased. Later, Paul tied her to the bed again and stepped out to make a phone call. Barbara struggled to free herself, but was unsuccessful. Then she noticed a key on the nightstand. It appeared that Paul had hastily closed the door and locked it. Oddly, it seemed as if he had done this intentionally, perhaps to protect her from himself. A few minutes later, he began banging on the door from the outside. Barbara waited in silence, her heart racing. Through the door, he told her that he knew she couldn't speak because of the gag in her mouth. He urged her not to tell the police that Paul had hurt her, claiming he never meant to harm her and was sorry for what had happened. His final words were, "I love you, and I'm leaving." After that, the sounds outside faded away. He had truly left. At first, Barbara was too scared to move. She didn't scream or call for help, fearing he was still outside, waiting for a reason to hurt her. She wondered if he had said those things to test her, as if she needed to prove something. However, she also realized that if she waited too long, he might change his mind, and she would miss her chance to escape. Finally, Barbara managed to free herself using the sharp edge of a piece of glass from the nightstand. She quickly called the front desk, telling them that a serial killer had kidnapped her, then hung up. The administrator alerted the police and requested assistance. A few minutes later, police officers opened the door. After her release, Barbara immediately called Beverly to hear the voices of both her sister and her son. They were overjoyed that she had managed to escape. However, despite the happy reunion, Barbara was still troubled by the fact that Paul was still at large and could return to harm her. Her nightmare could not truly end as long as he remained free. Fortunately, she did not suffer serious physical injuries during her kidnapping, but the psychological effects left her deeply affected. Barbara experienced post-traumatic stress disorder for a long time. She credited her faith in God for helping her family heal and chose to forgive Paul in order to find peace moving forward. By November 17, law enforcement had learned that a patrol officer, Charles Campbell, was missing and suspected he might have been abducted by Paul. The officer had attempted to stop a vehicle and approached the driver's window, but he was too late and saw a weapon aimed at Charles. Paul kidnapped Charles and took the patrol car, leaving behind Barbara's car. Shortly after, the police vehicle was found abandoned on the roadside while Paul was trying to stop another driver, James Mayer. Now, Paul had two hostages, whom he later transferred to another vehicle after killing the driver. About 100 kilometers into Georgia, a gas station employee noticed a man in uniform acting strangely in the back seat of one of the vehicles that had pulled in. He promptly alerted emergency services. After the vehicle left, the employee reported his observations, which helped law enforcement identify the car and its location. They initiated a chase and managed to intercept the vehicle. However, Paul refused to stop, even with flat tires. Driving on flat tires didn't last long. He lost control and crashed into a barrier. Paul abandoned the vehicle and fled into the woods. The police chased him closely, and explosions were heard from the forest. Despite this, Paul managed to escape again. The following day, a hunter saw Paul in the woods. He noticed that Paul was injured and reported the sighting to the authorities. Eventually, Paul was captured and refused to reveal the location of Charles and James, the driver of a stolen car. On December 18, about a month after their abduction, they were found tied to a tree in Georgia, both dead from wounds inflicted by a weapon. News of Paul, the most dangerous serial killer, spread on television, bringing relief to Barbara and her family. She had spent over a day in captivity and fully realized the threat the detectives were facing. Barbara remembered that he had escaped from prison before and feared it could happen again, leaving her and her family feeling unsafe for a while. They moved in with relatives, but this offered little comfort to Barbara. Barbara understood that she could only find peace if Paul could never harm anyone again. During this time, she faced significant psychological struggles. On the way to prison, Paul had a devious plan in mind. He was placed in the sheriff's car, and they drove to the location. The driver and accompanying officer were unaware that Paul had a paperclip with him. During the drive, Paul waited for a moment when the officers were distracted and managed to pick the lock on his handcuffs. A struggle broke out, and he seized the officer's weapon. Fortunately, the sheriff reacted quickly. He attacked Paul, emptying his entire magazine, realizing that both were in mortal danger and only decisive action could save their lives. Paul had died. This news brought immense relief to Barbara, her family, and many others who had been anxiously following the villain's actions across the country. Finally, he could no longer pose a threat, allowing everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. After much contemplation, Barbara ultimately decided to stay in her home instead of moving. Although she was going through a difficult time, the house held memories of her mother and the joyful moments of her childhood. Among these memories was her miraculous escape from one of the most dangerous serial killers in the U.S. during the 1970s. As she worked to heal from her trauma, Barbara married Jim Abel. Despite the challenges she faced, including surviving cancer, she raised Dale. Motivated by her experiences and perhaps Paul's quest for notoriety, Barbara wrote a book detailing her abduction from her own perspective. She vividly described the horrors she faced with the killer and focused on the strategies she used to escape the fate that befell many of his victims. Sadly, her sister Beverly, who passed away from cancer in 2019, never had the chance to read Barbara's book, published in 2021, but Beverly was involved in the early stages of its creation and supported her sister throughout the process. As it turned out, besides Barbara, there was another survivor named Sandy Fox, who was also a writer. There is a theory that Paul intentionally left these two women alive so they could write books about him and make him famous. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Polly Klaas. Polly Hannah Klaas was born on January 3, 1981, in Fairfax, California, USA. Her family included her father Mark, mother Eva, and younger sister Annie. After her parents' divorce when she was very young, Polly and Annie lived with their mother in Petaluma, California. As for Mark, he had a new relationship after the divorce, and Polly got along very well with this woman. Overall, their family was very harmonious, and she spent time with both her mother and father, with no problems between them. Polly was a quiet and innocent child who had a few close friends but was generally very shy. However, she found confidence and joy in theater, participating in various school plays and community musicals where she often took the lead role. Her main aspiration is to become a talented musical theater actress. Aside from theater, Polly loves hosting and attending sleepovers with her friends, a regular activity shared among her close-knit group. On October 1, 1993, Polly asked her mother if she could have two friends, Jillian and Kate, over for a sleepover. Her mother agreed, and the two friends arrived at Polly's house in the afternoon. They had dinner together, and the evening went smoothly until Polly's mother went to bed around 9:45 p.m. due to a bad headache. She told the girls that she was going to sleep and asked them to wake her up if they needed any help at any time. After taking 2 sleeping pills, she fell into a deep sleep. The calm night was disrupted after 11 p.m. when Eva, Polly's mother, was jolted awake by the screams of Jillian and Kate. The two girls frantically told her that a man had broken into the house and taken Polly away. Eva made an emergency call to the police and then went to check on her other daughter, Annie, who was in her room, seemingly unaware of the incident. When the police arrived, they started questioning Polly's two friends, Jillian and Kate. The girls explained they were in a room, select on a Halloween costume and just having fun. As the night wore on, around 11 p.m., Polly suggested it was time to go to bed, and her friends agreed. She offered to get the inflatable bed she and her mom had set up earlier so the three could sleep together. However, when Polly opened the door to her room, a man was standing in front of them, holding a knife and not wearing a mask. Since Halloween approached, 3 girls initially thought man's threatening claims were a prank and burst into laughter. However, the man's facial expression quickly turned to anger, causing them to realize the situation was more serious. He swiftly forcing the girls into a room, where he bound their hands and feet with rope. When questioned about who lived in the house, all 3 girls, including Jillian and Kate, provided the same answer: Polly. Next, the man removed the pillowcases from the pillows and placed them over Jillian and Kate's heads, preventing them from seeing. He instructed the girls to count up to 1,000, assuring them that he would temporarily take Polly away but return her shortly. Unbeknownst to the man, the girls peered through gaps in the pillowcases and noticed his swift departure. Then, they attempted to release themselves from the restraints. After about 30 minutes of struggle, they managed to break free. Upon escaping the room, they immediately sought out Eva to inform her that her daughter Polly had been taken by the man. Jillian and Kate provided the police with a detailed account of the events. They also gave a brief description of the man, who had not worn a mask and covered his face, allowing the girls to get a clear look at him. As a result, the police were able to create a sketch of the suspect to aid in the search. The investigation at Polly's house did not yield much evidence. Several footprints were found, but they all belonged to Polly, her family members, or friends who had visited the house recently. However, some unusual fibers were discovered on the carpet, which did not match the carpet in Polly's house. Further analysis revealed that these fibers likely came from the carpet of a vehicle. The police then analyzed the cars of individuals who were known to the family and had visited the house, but none of them matched the fibers. This led to the assumption that the fibers were from the kidnapper's vehicle. A palm print was discovered at the scene. At that time, fingerprinting and DNA technology had not yet advanced to the point where it could be compared to a database. However, the print was preserved for potential future use if a suspect was later identified. In Polly's room, a piece of fabric resembling silk was also found. The fabric had a distinctive pattern and appeared to have been cut from a garment with scissors. The police believed this fabric could serve as a valuable clue in the future. A hair was discovered, but its origin remained unknown since DNA analysis was not advanced enough to thoroughly examine it at the time. Polly's case generated one of the largest searches in the United States at that time. Thousands of volunteers joined the search, with 4,000 people combing neighborhoods, vacant lots, and large estates near her home. The police also attempted to locate drivers matching the suspect's description, but all did not bring any results. The police had a narrow 24-hour window to locate Polly after her disappearance, as chances of finding her alive would significantly decrease beyond that time frame. To expedite the investigation, they handed the case over to the FBI and launched an urgent search. However, as the days went by, hopes of a safe recovery of Polly began to dwindle. During the investigation, police inquired about witnesses in the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual on the night of the abduction. Several neighbors reported seeing a suspicious individual lurking around the area, describing him as peculiar-looking. They didn't think much of it at the time because they had no reason to believe the man was capable of committing a serious crime like kidnapping. As a result, they failed to report the incident to the authorities. The police shared a sketch of the suspect with the neighbors, based on a description provided by Polly's friends. The neighbors all recognized the man in the sketch. In a separate investigation, the police also questioned the teachers and staff at Polly's school to see if anyone knew the man or had any information about Polly's disappearance. Unfortunately, no one at the school had any knowledge about the man or the incident surrounding Polly's disappearance. The staff members all had alibis for the time in question, and none of them matched the description or resembled the sketch of suspects. The police have conducted a thorough and comprehensive investigation of the case, they comparing a fiber found in Polly's house to the car mats of teachers and school staff vehicles, but unfortunately, no matches were found. Over time, feelings of hopelessness and fear grew, not only for Polly's family but also for the authorities and the general public. Everyone is concerned about the threat this criminal may pose to society, so they demand that the police quickly solve the case. To gather more information, a $200,000 reward was offered to anyone providing information that could aid in locating Polly. This reward was funded by actress Winona Ryder, who also held a press conference to publicly appeal kidnapper for Polly's safe return. At the time, the internet was still in its early stages, and law enforcement agencies, including the police and the FBI, were unfamiliar with using the internet to locate missing persons. To assist in the investigation, 3 individuals from California took matters into their own hands. They created and posted a picture of Polly, a sketch of her suspected kidnapper, and an advertisement for a reward for any information that could lead to her safe return. Although social media platforms did not exist at the time, other online communication tools were available. As a result, approximately 25 million people in the United States viewed Polly's picture online. Initially, FBI investigators believed that the internet could play a crucial role in the investigation. Although the disappearance became increasingly well known, but internet users do not bring any valuable information. However, this has attracted many volunteers to help, and telephone switchboards were established with hundreds of information every day. This thing also brings hope in the families of other missing children, who reached out to Polly's family to support and assistance, hoping that by working together, they might be able to find their own missing children. The investigators were growing increasingly frustrated. It has been many weeks since Polly was kidnapped, and they had yet to uncover any leads. The identity of the kidnapper remained a mystery, and without any DNA evidence, they were unable to make a match. Not even a hair or palm print had been left found, leaving them feeling helpless. Finally, a new breakthrough in the case has come. A phone call was called to Polly's father, Mark. On the other end of the line, he heard a girl's voice that sounded uncannily like his daughter's. She claimed to be Polly and told Mark that she was being held at a hotel. The kidnapper had momentarily left her alone, and that's why she was able to contact T. However, before Mark could glean any more information, the girl hung up. Mark immediately rushed to the police station to tell the news. Unfortunately, the FBI at the time lacked the advanced technology to track a call that had already been disconnected. All they could do was wait anxiously for the kidnapper to make another move, so they can only sit and wait for a new call, hoping to trace it. A few hours after the first call, the same girl who had spoken to Mark called again. The police managed to trace the call, but found it odd that the location was not a hotel, as the girl claimed, but a residential neighborhood. When officers arrived and knocked on the door of the house where the call originated, they discovered it was a prank. It turned out a teenage girl, close to Polly's age, lived there, so their voices were similar. She explained that her friends had dared her to do it. The girl was not arrested or taken to the police station. Instead, her parents were advised to monitor her behavior and remind her not to joke about such serious issues. On November 28, 1993, nearly 2 months after Polly disappeared, police received a call from a woman. She reported that she found 3 suspicious items on a several-acre plot of land she owned. The police, along with the FBI, went to the location and found 3 critical pieces of evidence: a piece of silk identical to one in Polly's room, a pair of ballet shoes that Eva claimed were missing from the house the night Polly vanished, and some duct tape. These evidence led the police to suspect that Polly might have been in the area. Before all this evidence was discovered, on the day Polly disappeared, the same woman went to the police to report a problem. Strangers had been wandering onto her plot of land. She owned a lot of land, which was mostly forest, and had only one small house inside. Although there were signs indicating it was private property, there was no fence to keep people out, so many unknowingly crossed onto her land. Although her land had many intruders, but one particular out in her memory. On the night Polly was abducted, a man drove up to her house in his car, which got stuck in the mud. The nanny, who was caring for the woman's son, was the first to notice the man but didn't approach him because she was too scared. The homeowner also didn't approach him, as she thought he looked angry. They decided to call the police. When the officers arrived, they interrogated the man about why he was there. He explained that he hadn't realized it was private property and promised to leave quickly. However, he requested their assistance in getting his car out of the mud. The officers noticed that the man seemed very nervous, scared, and sweaty, and he also appeared to be under the influence of drugs. Since they were unable to conduct a drug test at the time and the man was not acting aggressively, they were unable to arrest him. The officers helped him out of the mud, and he eventually drove away. This man was Richard Allen Davis, born in 1954 in San Francisco, California. His childhood was troubled due to the violence inflicted by his parents. When he was 12, his parents separated. His mother completely disowned him, saying she wanted nothing to do with him, and left him with his father. Richard's father was very irresponsible, often leaving the house for hours or even days. Richard was frequently left alone, sometimes staying with neighbors and sometimes staying with some of his relatives. During his teenage years, Richard began engaging in criminal activities such as stealing and fighting, which led to several months in reform school. At 17, Richard committed a violent robbery that almost resulted in the victim's death. The judge offered him a choice: go to reform school or join the U.S. Army. Richard chose the Army but was dishonorably discharged in less than 2 years. As he grew older, his criminal record grew longer. Around the age of 20, he was sentenced to 15 years for robbery and kidnapping, but was released after 1 year on parole for good behavior. During that period, Richard was troubled by another accusation. Many of his friends suspected him of killing a 19-year-old girl named Marlene, even though the police acknowledged that she had left voluntarily. However, those close to Marlene believed Richard was responsible for her death, occurring the night they attended a party together. These were merely rumors, with no evidence to support them. When Polly went missing, Richard was having a difficult time, and he had no fixed address, so his whereabouts were unclear. The police distributed a special leaflet exclusively to officers, urging them to be extremely cautious. They withheld information from the media due to concerns that Richard might flee California or even the United States. On November 13, 1993, Richard was arrested while driving under the influence of alcohol. A police officer stopped him, and he failed a breathalyzer test. Upon checking Richard's name and picture, the officer recognized him as the suspect wanted in the Polly kidnapping case. The officer carefully informed Richard that he was being arrested for violating probation due to drunk driving. Richard complied and was taken to the police station. There, officers read him his rights and revealed that he was actually being held for the kidnapping of Polly. Richard was taken in for questioning. The investigation was careful and he eventually admitted to kidnapping Polly. His palm print matched exactly with the one found at Polly's house, and carpet fibers from his car matched those found in the house. Polly's friends were brought to the police station for questioning and immediately identified Richard as the kidnapper. Additionally, a piece of silk identical to one found in Polly's room was discovered in his car and on the piece of land of the woman who reported the incident to the police. All evidence pointed to Richard, leading he to finally confess. He explained that he had been using substances with friends that day and felt unwell. He decided to break into a house in a neighborhood to commit a burglary. Richard drove around until he reached Polly's neighborhood. Seeing an open window, he entered the house. He stated that he hadn't planned the incident, didn't know Polly or her family, and hadn't been following them. He was searching for valuables but didn't find much. As he was about to leave, Polly opened the bedroom door and saw him. Richard noted that she was very frightened and, in his panic, decided to take her. He stated that he put Polly in his car and started driving, eventually stopping in a vacant lot where he assaulted her. Afterwards, he got back into the driver's seat. When the woman and the babysitter spotted Richard on private piece of land, Polly was in the back seat. Police officers helped him retrieve his car from the mud, and at that point, Polly was still alive, which deeply frustrated officers as they believed her life could have been saved. After the car was pushed out of the mud, Richard drove down the highway, strangled Polly to death, and left her body there. Richard reported the exact location of the grave to the police, leading to a search that took place on December 4, 1993, 2 months 3 days after the girl was abducted. Polly's body was found in a grave beside the highway, dug by Richard himself. The forensic examination mainly confirmed the cause of death as strangulation, consistent with Richard's account. The date of her death was approximately the same day she disappeared. With all the evidence, Richard Allen Davis was put on trial for kidnapping, murdering, and raping Polly Klaas. During the trial, Richard had a chance to speak. Besides apologizing to the family, he accused Polly's father of sexually abusing her. Richard claimed that Polly had told him not to do to her what her father did to her. This accusation enraged Polly's father, who nearly attacked Richard, but the people present compartmented him. Richard's words shocked everyone, not only because he didn't apologize but also because they doubted the truth of his claim about Polly's father. On June 18, 1996, Richard Allen Davis was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Polly Klaas. In August, he was sentenced to death. He tried to overturn the death sentence but failed. In 2006, Richard overdosed on pills in his cell but was revived and returned to prison. In 2009, his lawyer attempted to appeal his conviction to the Supreme Court but was unsuccessful. The Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case. The case of Maria Lehner, and Laura Dalton. There are individuals who can be described as true parasites. Living off others for extended periods, they are cunning manipulators who constantly exploit their victims. Even more frighteningly, some do not hesitate to take their behavior to the extreme, committing crimes with unimaginable cruelty. On the evening of March 19, 1999, residents of an apartment complex near the Iowa City campus were alarmed by a strong smell of burning and smoke coming from one of the apartments. Some residents stepped outside and saw a fierce fire raging through the windows of a small apartment. They immediately called the fire department. When firefighters arrived on the scene, the fire had already spread, shattering windows and producing thick columns of black smoke. Despite their best efforts, extinguishing the fire proved difficult. Neighbors stated that the apartment was believed to be unoccupied. As the permanent residents were out of town, firefighters initially focused on fighting the fire from the outside before entering the building. Once inside, the smoke began to clear. A desolation scene unfolded. The entire apartment had been devastated. With furniture and belongings reduced to ashes, they found a body lying near the entrance to the hallway. More shockingly, a second body was found in a back room. Both bodies were burned beyond recognition. The first body, located near the door, was less severely burned and was identified as a young woman who appeared to have died from smoke inhalation while attempting to escape. The second body, lying on a bed in a back bedroom. With most of the flesh completely destroyed, it was impossible to identify the victims at the scene due to the severe burns. For this, an examination in the laboratory of forensic experts would be required. Police were quickly called in to investigate the cause of the fire and the deaths. Initial theories suggested that the victims may have succumbed to toxic fumes or suffered an accident, possibly caused by an unextinguished cigarette, since the apartment was a common rental for students during exam periods. Investigators also considered the possibility that the fire was linked to excessive drinking. However, what they uncovered next completely shifted the direction of the investigation. Among the ashes, firefighters found a few items that were surprisingly intact. Among these items, they discovered documents that could help identify the deceased. A driver's license was found in a purse belonging to one of the victims. Following an investigation, the forensic experts confirmed the identities of the victims in there. A victim was identified as 29-year-old Laura Dalton a few days before the fire. Laura had traveled to Iowa City to visit her cousin. Strangely, Laura neither owned nor rented the burned apartment, suggesting she had ended up there by chance. None of the neighbors recognized her. Laura had grown up in the area and lived with her parents before moving away as an adult. However, she often returned to her hometown to visit family and stayed for several days. Iowa City was her favorite place, where she enjoyed spending time not only with her relatives, but also with her friends. It was a charming town where most residents lived modest lives centered around education and part-time work. The second victim, Maria Lehner, was a 27-year-old woman. She came to this town on business. She lived in a rented apartment that was not the one involved in the fire. Maria, like Laura, had no known relationship or connection with the owners of the burned apartment. The next morning, Laura's cousin and Maria's mother went to the morgue to identify the bodies. However, the autopsy revealed a disturbing detail. Both victims had died before the fire started. Their lungs showed no signs of smoke or hot air inhalation, indicating they were not breathing when the fire consumed the apartment. Although the body was severely damaged, the forensic team quickly determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the head, most likely from a construction tool. While inspecting the burned apartment, forensic experts discovered what appeared to be bloodstains and strands of hair. The police promptly began analyzing these as potential evidence. This evidence later confirmed their suspicions were right. A barbell was found in the apartment and identified as the murder weapon. as it contained traces of blood from both victims during the apartment search. Investigators also found an empty can, despite severe fire damage. Appeared to be a can typically used for storing and transporting fuel. Meanwhile, the owners of the apartment denied ever storing fuel in their home, so they determined it had been used shortly before the fire. Detectives concluded that the attacker had murdered Maria and Laura, poured gasoline from the can on their bodies and nearby furniture, and set the apartment on fire to destroy evidence. The presence of flammable substances made it clear that this was a deliberate and carefully planned double murder. However, proven facts, not assumptions, were needed to solve the case. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the scene. A cigarette butt was discovered near the bodies simultaneously. Forensic experts were in for a great surprise, as it turned out that traces of incipient decomposition were found on the bodies. This decomposition will take at least a day after death. No evidence suggested that the bodies had been moved to the apartment after the murders. Most likely, Maria and Laura were killed there, and their bodies were burned several days later. Through investigation, the investigators speculate that Laura was killed on the night between Wednesday and Thursday, and her body remained in the apartment. Maria was killed a day later. On the night between Thursday and Friday, this discovery shocked the police, as they had initially believed the arson was carried out immediately after the murders to destroy evidence. The most puzzling aspect was that Maria had been brought to the apartment where Laura's body had already been decomposing for a day. Laura's friends reported that the last time they saw her alive was on Wednesday evening. That night, the group of friends decided to spend the evening at a bar, and Laura joined them for a few hours. Everyone was having fun, drinking, and relaxing. They tried not to overindulge. During the evening, Laura met a young man who had been sitting at a nearby table for most of the night. As the group became more intoxicated, Laura and the man started talking. Witnesses later admitted they didn't pay much attention to him. The two quickly struck up a conversation, and after some time, the man suggested they go to another bar. Laura initially declined, but eventually agreed. After some persuasion, witnesses stated that this was the last time anyone saw Laura alive. She left with the man shortly before midnight, according to the autopsy report. She was killed not long after. The thing to do now is to find this strange man. Unfortunately, no one knew his name and could not really describe his appearance. The police needed at least some details to begin the investigation. Witnesses were thoroughly questioned to create a rough profile of the unknown man. He was described as tall, around 20 years old or slightly older. With brown hair, witnesses also noted his disheveled appearance. Laura's friends were unaware of what had happened to her. She didn't call them the next day, and she hadn't contacted anyone at all. Laura also failed to attend the group's next party, held at the same bar the following evening. This time, Laura's friend, Maria, was present at the party. Maria's body was also later found in the burned apartment, and it appears she was killed just one day after Laura. Strangely, witnesses reported an almost identical story about Laura. Maria had been drinking with friends, and she caught the attention of a similarly unkempt young man sitting at a nearby table. He appeared friendly and spent much of the evening trying to charm her. The man seemed skilled at gaining trust, easily convincing Maria to leave with him for another party. She failed to recognize the threat and trusted the persuasive stranger. The bar owner also noticed them as they left. He provided the investigative agency with a slightly more detailed description of the man the investigator were searching for. This helped detectives create a more accurate sketch despite the limited information, but the investigation now had a lead. The police also identified his behavior pattern. He observed women in bars for extended periods, waiting until they were intoxicated enough to lower their guard before making his move. In addition, he had access to one of the rented apartments. Either using his own key or the trust of the landlords, the police interviewed everyone, including students, who might have had access to the burned apartment. However, most of them had moved out long ago and no longer had access. For a time, the investigation stalled. In addition to the help of forensic experts and laboratory tests, additional evidence is needed to advance the case. One of the key stages of the work was to conduct an analysis of the discovered empty can. The resulting picture was consistent with what is left by gasoline vapors. The empty can was clearly used to carry fuel, which was poured over the bodies. Among the other evidence found at the scene of the double murder was a matchbox with just one match missing. It appeared the perpetrator assumed the fire would destroy all evidence. However, the fire was extinguished before everything was consumed. Investigators concluded the match had been used to ignite the fire. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA were found on the matchbox, leaving it unusable for identifying the suspect. After unsuccessful attempts at investigation, the investigators returned to the scene to look for more clues. By that point, the apartment had been cleaned and organized, making it impossible to find any new evidence. Initially, they had photographs taken at the scene of the fire. In one of the photos, they noticed a pair of suspicious glasses. These glasses matched descriptions provided by witnesses who had seen strangers at the bar days before the fire. Although the glasses survived the fire, they were not listed among the collected evidence. Fortunately, the apartment owner had not discarded them and handed them over to the police. When detectives examined the glasses, they discovered they also did not belong to the former tenants. The most valuable evidence ended up in the hands of the investigators, which later allowed them to obtain a huge amount of valuable information about the criminal to prove his connection with the murders, that these were not ordinary glasses, but ones with special lenses that correct vision. They were checked to determine what vision deviation the criminal had. This helped the detectives narrow down their suspect and determine whether these were his glasses. After that, the police officers had enough evidence and testimony to approximately reconstruct the picture of what happened. They reviewed the chain of events that led to this tragic outcome several times. In the end, the most probable version was recognized as the following. Presumably, both girls died one day before the fire started. The cause of death for each was prolonged beating with a blunt object, likely a barbell. They received head injuries incompatible with life to get rid of traces of the crime. The attacker decided to set fire to the apartment along with the bodies. The attacker appeared to stage the scene to resemble a real-life event. He placed the second victim in the hallway, while the first victim was beaten to death in bed. Afterward, he brought a gas can of gasoline into the apartment and carefully poured it over the furniture, floor, walls, and the victims' bodies. However, his critical mistake was smoking during the process. At the crime scene, forensic experts discovered a cigarette that had been extinguished and was not destroyed by the fire. Initially, no traces of the killer were found on the cigarette. Based on the circumstances, it seems the attacker was bent over, smoking, and pouring gasoline. When the concentration of vapors increased, the cigarette ignited. The resulting flames struck the attacker in the face, causing him to drop his glasses. The glasses were found slightly melted. It being in a less damaged part of the apartment, it is likely that the cigarette ignited the gasoline, triggering a chain reaction. This forced the killer to abandon the gas can, glasses, and cigarette at the crime scene, and assuming they would be destroyed in the fire. However, these items became key evidence. After interviewing the owner of the burned apartment, it was revealed that several valuable items, including 2 expensive household appliances, were missing. The investigators suspected the attacker would try to sell the stolen items, so they focused on local pawn shops. As these are the quickest and easiest places to sell stolen goods, their efforts paid off when they identified a suspect. After speaking with the owner of the pawn shop closest to the burned apartment, the detectives obtained receipts for items matching the stolen goods. Selling property at a pawn shop requires presenting an ID and filling out paperwork, which meant the attacker couldn't avoid giving his real name. This is how the investigators came across John Lee Memmer. John was a 20-year-old unemployed man who was well known in the city since he was a regular at various parties. He knew where to get a free drink. He was a good conversationalist and was described as a quiet guy. John attended various events after moving to the city. He had been jobless for a long time and didn't have a permanent home. He relied on friends, particularly students, who let him stay in their rented apartments, allowing him to get by. It is important to note that his appearance matches the description of the suspect and also often wears glasses. When the police looked into John's background, they discovered he had previously been conditionally released early for theft and document forgery. Now, John, the main suspect, could face a real prison sentence due to repeated offenses. An investigation also began into his possible involvement in the double murder. Immediately after that, John was arrested, and during interrogation, the police noticed slight burns on his face, including a small burn on his nose. This detail reinforced the detective's suspicion of his involvement in the fire. John appeared nervous and often hesitated before answering their questions. When he realized he was a suspect in the arson and murders, he began changing his story, leading to numerous contradictions. He claimed that, on that night, he broke in and stole several household appliances, which he later pawned. However, he denied any involvement in the arson or the murders of Maria and Laura. Refused to accept those charges. John explained that he had been using the apartment with another homeless man because, knowing the owners would be out of town for an extended period, he described the second homeless man as suspicious and potentially dangerous. But the investigation could not confirm that this person existed. It seemed likely that John had fabricated the story to shift the blame. The investigators was determined that just a few days after the discovery of the two bodies, John visited an optical store and ordered new glasses using an old prescription. The glasses found in the burnt apartment completely corresponded to the prescription for correcting John's vision. This didn't seem like a mere coincidence. John was unable to explain why his glasses were found in the burned apartment, claiming he had lost them a long time ago. Following this, forensic experts decided to analyze the cigarette butt found at the arson site, suspecting it might contain DNA evidence from the perpetrator. By this point, John had already provided the investigators with samples for analysis. The results revealed traces of saliva and skin on the cigarette butt, which were examined and matched to John's DNA. This breakthrough was achieved using advanced forensic methods introduced in the late 1990s, which had become widely used by police at the time. These things strongly linked John to the crime scene. Though not directly to the victims, John later changed his story, admitting that he had been in the apartment and had snuck in with another homeless person when the apartment renter was not home. He offered a plausible explanation for why his glasses and cigarettes were found there. The police also focused on other pieces of evidence, particularly a leather jacket belonging of Laura, which was found in the ashes. Investigators began searching for traces of DNA. Initially, the jacket was examined under ultraviolet light, but no traces were found. Then, a different method was used to search for fingerprints. The fingerprint on Laura's jacket was identified as John's, however. This alone did not confirm his involvement in the murder. Detectives also examined John's shoes and the clothes he wore on the days of the murders. On one of his shoes, they found two tiny droplets of blood, about the size of a match head. Forensic scientists analyzed the samples and determined that the blood belonged to Maria. It was clear that John had attempted to wash his clothes, but traces of blood remained. Now, the police obtained undeniable proof of his guilt. John was unable to explain how the victim's blood ended up on his shoes. This detail became clear evidence that he had been in contact with Maria around the time of her death. When confronted with the accusations and presented with the evidence, John changed his story yet again. This time, he claimed that he had invited Maria and Laura over. They had been intimate. Then he left first, however, due to the condition of the bodies. This claim couldn't be verified. Forensic experts found no indication of an intimate relationship Prior to Maria and Laura deaths, his story was clearly false, and his shifting testimonies only deepened the investigators' mistrust. With all the evidence collected, the prosecutor's office pieced together the chain of events leading to the fire and the double murder. John had gained access to the apartment while the tenants were out of town. There were no signs of forced entry. This easy access to the home alarmed the tenant's owner and moved elsewhere. After meeting Maria and Laura at a nightclub, John waited until they were intoxicated and less alert. He then initiated friendly conversation, flirted, and used his charm to gain their trust. Eventually, he convinced them to go to this apartment. His intention was to pursue intimacy, but neither Laura nor Maria reciprocated his advances. This rejection infuriated him and caused him to lose control. In his anger, he attacked Maria and Laura with a barbell. The severe head injuries they sustained from the blows resulted in their deaths the following day. On Friday, John returned to the scene to destroy evidence and steal household appliances from the apartment to cover his tracks. He set a fire, but made several mistakes, leaving behind significant evidence at the crime scene. A few days later, John was tried on charges of first-degree murder and arson. The defense has stressed that John is not known for being aggressive, although he has a history of minor crimes. He has never physically harmed anyone. Besides, one key point the prosecution has highlighted is the tattoo of 2 teardrops near his eyes, a symbol commonly used in the criminal world to indicate murder. He got these tattoos before attending the trial. However, John claims that the tattoo were merely a tribute to 2 friends who died in a car accident. The prosecution presented a combination of circumstantial and direct evidence to build its case. As John has never confessed to his guilt, the overwhelming evidence convinced the jury that John was the perpetrator. As a result, John Lee Memmer was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. He's sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. After serving 10 years, John appealed, claiming that the public defenders had failed to do their job effectively. He argued that the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, and that his defense team had failed to adequately challenge it. The appeal was considered by the court. However, after a retrial, he was found guilty, and the sentence was upheld. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Stephanie Flores Ramirez. Stephanie Flores Ramirez was born on July 22, 1988, to Ricardo Flores and Mari Elena Ramirez. She was a kind and easygoing child. Her family was quite wealthy. Her father was involved in the auto racing industry and was building a successful political career. Stephanie grew up in a prestigious family. Her 4 brothers were all from the upper class and had access to the best education. Stephanie excelled in school, earning the admiration and respect of her teachers and classmates. In 2008, at the age of 20, Stephanie enrolled at the University of San Martin de Porres to study business administration. By 2010, as a third-year student, she had many great ideas and hopes for her future. Despite her innocent appearance and excellent academic performance, Stephanie knew how to enjoy life. With a lot of money at her disposal, she frequented the best nightclubs and casinos in the country. On the night of May 30, 2010, at a casino called Atlantic City, Stephanie met a mysterious man named Joran van der Sloot at around 3 a.m. She sat down at the poker table next to him, and they were instantly attracted to each other, although they came from different countries. They both spoke fluent English and quickly found common ground. Stephanie was drawn to Joran's confidence and easygoing demeanor, while he was captivated by her beauty and smile. During their conversation, Stephanie asked Joran how he came to Lima. He said he was on vacation to escape some personal troubles. At that time, Stephanie had no idea that his troubles were related to the murder of a woman. Joran deceived her by claiming that he was the son of a wealthy lawyer and judge. This made Stephanie feel safe, as she believed that someone from a wealthy family like hers could not be dangerous. They talked at the poker table late into the night. Stephanie was an experienced gambler, knowing how to assess odds and calculate how to win money. Just a few days earlier, she had won Dollarton in a game after hours of chatting. They had consumed a considerable amount of alcohol. What started as a casual conversation gradually turned into flirting. Eventually, Joran invited Stephanie to spend the night with him, and to her surprise, she agreed. They went to a hotel in the Miraflores area, where Joran rented a room. There are differing accounts of whether the pair became intimate. Some say they had an intimate encounter, while others claim that Stephanie simply went to his room to continue playing online poker. The details of that night are somewhat unclear, however. It is confirmed that at some point, Stephanie accessed Joran's laptop. Stephanie later learned of Joran's connection to Natalie Holloway's death. She had been lured into a dangerous situation, and now she was trapped with a criminal. Stephanie tried to escape, but was unable to. When Joran realized she had discovered his secret, he became furious. A struggle ensued. He hit Stephanie in the nose with a crowbar, causing her to bleed mercilessly. Joran overpowered her and began strangling her. He then continued to attack her until she stopped breathing. When morning came, Stephanie still hadn't returned home. Her father, Ricardo, grew increasingly worried as time passed. He knew his daughter always came home, which made him fear that something was wrong. He contacted his son, Enrique, for help in finding Stephanie. They called Stephanie's co-workers, but when they found nothing, they contacted the police to report her missing. Ricardo discovered that his daughter had been gambling the night before. Peruvian police then went to Atlantic City to investigate further. There, they reviewed surveillance camera footage of Stephanie playing poker and drinking during the night. She met a tall young man. The police quickly identified him and obtained his national identification number. From that point on, Joran van der Sloot became the prime suspect in Stephanie's disappearance. It was discovered that the two had left the casino together around 5 a.m. that morning, although their exact destination was initially unclear. It was noted that they were returning to the hotel where Joran was staying. The footage showed the pair entering his hotel room. Hours later, Joran left the room alone, but returned with 2 cups of coffee and a loaf of bread. 3 hours after they entered, Joran left the room again, still alone. As he left, he informed a hotel employee that Stephanie was still in the room, but asked that she not be disturbed as she was only sleeping. On June 2, 3 days after Stephanie's death, and after Joran had checked out, a hotel employee discovered her body in room 309. Police found a tennis racket in the room, believed to be the weapon used in the attack. After verifying the name associated with the room, police confirmed that it was Joran van der Sloot. After leaving the hotel, he left the TV on full volume, possibly creating the illusion that someone was still inside. Police were unable to determine where he went after the crime. In an effort to quickly identify Joran, the police released his information and photo to all media outlets. In further investigation, police learned that Joran van der Sloot was born on August 6, 1987, into a wealthy family. He has 2 older brothers. His mother is an art teacher, and his father has a well-paying job that provides for the family. They live a comfortable life. Enjoying traveling, Joran attends a local international school, where he is a diligent student. He is tall, attractive, and athletic, participating in football and tennis while regularly practicing with his father. Despite doing well in school, Joran was a spoiled brat and a habitual liar. In contrast to his calm older brothers, he displayed arrogant and flamboyant behavior, often sneaking out at night to go to casinos. In 2005, he met an American girl named Natalie Holloway. As their relationship developed, Joran expressed a desire to be intimate with her. When Natalie refused, he became violent and kicked her in the head when she was unconscious. He abused her to cover up his crime. He murdered her. The case of Natalie's disappearance and Joran's involvement attracted international media attention. Maintaining public interest for a decade, Joran was the prime suspect from the beginning. But due to numerous legal issues, he could not be convicted despite repeated interrogations and detentions. How did Joran get to Lima? And where did he get the money for the trip? In fact, he blackmailed Natalie's family, promising to reveal the location of their daughter's body in exchange for cash. After receiving a portion of the money, Joran fled to Lima to pursue his gambling ventures there. At a casino in Atlantic City, he met his second victim, Stephanie, whom he killed on the 5th anniversary of Natalie's death. Joran became the prime suspect in the case, leading to his placement on Interpol's wanted list. Police in neighboring countries were informed of the situation. His whereabouts were soon traced. When he entered Chile via the Chacaluta border, police confirmed that he was in Chile. After tracing him, he was later found after taking a taxi in Vina del Mar, a coastal city. Chilean police arrested him as he was walking toward Santiago. Joran was immediately taken into custody, and the bloodied clothing of the victim, Stephanie, was found in his possession. Initially, Joran denied any involvement in her death, claiming that armed robbers had attacked them in their hotel room. He alleged that when Stephanie refused to cooperate, they killed her. This explanation was seen as an attempt to evade responsibility. On July 5, after Joran was deported to Peru, an official investigation began. He was questioned, and after several days of police interrogation, he realized he had no way out and confessed to the crime. In his written statement, he detailed the events that took place that night. He claimed that he had left the hotel to buy coffee and bread, but when he returned, he discovered that Stephanie was using his computer and that she knew he was involved in Natalie's death. According to Joran, when he tried to explain with Stephanie, she hit him and ran toward the door. He then stopped her. He insisted that he never intended to kill her. However, when she invaded his privacy without permission, he became angry, lost control, and ultimately took Stephanie's life. Joran claimed that he drank coffee laced with an illegal pill, then packed his things and left the hotel. Subsequent toxicology tests showed no trace of any pills in his system, suggesting that he may have used this strategy to reduce his sentence in Peru. Crimes committed under the influence of illegal substances often result in lighter sentences, and it appears that Joran's attorneys were aware of this and sought to exploit it. Joran was subsequently arrested on charges of robbery and first-degree murder. Given the severity of Joran's actions and the wealth of his family, the judge denied his request for bail on the morning of the trial. An angry crowd gathered outside the courthouse, expressing their outrage by throwing fruit and eggs at Joran as he was escorted inside. Joran had previously been held in a maximum security prison in South America, known for its harsh conditions, where he was constantly monitored. He was offered a chance to be transferred to a prison in Aruba if he revealed the location of Natalie's body. But he refused the offer. Joran's attorneys have argued that Joran lost control during the attack on Stephanie because she took his laptop without permission. If the judge had accepted this argument, Joran could have faced a lighter sentence of only 3 to 5 years in prison, and with good behavior, he might have been released after 20 months. However, these efforts have failed. On January 11, 2012, Joran van der Sloot pleaded guilty to the murder and robbery of Stephanie Flores Ramirez. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison and ordered to pay $75 to Stephanie's family. This marked the end of Stephanie's case. However, Joran's criminal story is not over yet. He was recently extradited to the United States to face charges of extorting Natalie's parents. Concerned that his sentence could be longer than life, he decided to plead guilty. Natalie Holloway's case took a turn when Joran van der Sloot pleaded guilty to extortion and wire fraud. The plea added 20 years to his sentence, which he would have to serve after his release from a Peruvian prison. Although Joran confessed to killing Natalie, he was not punished for that crime. Instead, he was sentenced to a total of 28 years in a Peruvian prison. After serving his sentence, he was transferred to a U.S. prison to serve an additional 20 years for extorting Natalie's family during this time. Little was known about what happened. Notably, Joran's father, who had supported him, died of a heart attack. Although Joran faced a total of 48 years in prison, many felt that this punishment was insufficient given his cruelty. Stephanie and Natalie lived short but vibrant lives, filled with love and the promise of a bright future. Their families and friends are devastated by the loss of their beautiful daughters, sisters, and girlfriends. It is heartbreaking to know that their lives were taken by a criminal with no compassion. If Joran had been incarcerated sooner, with enough evidence against him, Stephanie might still be alive today. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of April Millsap. What could happen to a young woman simply walking through a quiet suburban neighborhood that is considered one of the safest in America? Normally, there would be nothing to worry about, but when a real predator lurks in the shadows, even the safest places can become the scene of a horrific tragedy. April Millsap, 14 years old by the summer of 2014. She was living with her family in Armada, a small town in Michigan, USA. April was a friendly and sweet girl who attended a local high school. She was an only child, and her parents had divorced when she was 6. After the divorce, her mother began a relationship with another man, who later became April's stepfather. April quickly grew close to her stepfather, and they developed a warm bond. April was a cheerful girl with a sense of humor, always bringing joy to her family. Her positive attitude helped her form a close circle of friends. She was creative, loved drawing, stayed active, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Despite her young age, April seemed mature and independent by the time she turned 14. She often walked her dog alone and enjoyed spending time with her friends while maintaining a close relationship with her family. April also had a boyfriend named Austin Schutt, who was a year older than her. They attended the same school and had been dating for about a year at the time of these events. In 2014, the town of Armada had a population of about 1.7 people. It was considered a safe and family-friendly place where everyone knew each other. However, as life sometimes proves, even the safest places can attract danger. Crimes in Armada were rare, but when they did occur, they caused significant alarm. On July 24, 2014, the summer holidays were in full swing. That day, April didn't have any plans to go out or meet friends. She slept until noon and spent most of the day on her computer, chatting with friends and playing games. Around 6 p.m., she decided to take her dog, Penny, for a walk. April often brought Penny along when she met friends or her boyfriend, Austin. That evening, she chose one of her usual walking routes, which she often used to relax. Her walks typically lasted no more than an hour. Her mother, Jennifer, waited for her at home without concern, but when an hour and a half passed and April still hadn't returned, Jennifer became increasingly anxious when April didn't respond to her calls or text messages. So she reached out to April's boyfriend, assuming they might be together. However, Austin told her he hadn't seen April all day and had only communicated with her online. Jennifer's worry deepened, and she began contacting April's friends and classmates, but no one knew where April could be. About half an hour later, there was a knock at the door, hoping it was April returning from her walk. Jennifer felt a brief sense of relief. Instead, she found Austin and his friends standing on the doorstep. They had come to check on April because they were also concerned. Austin then showed Jennifer a message he had received from April at 6:28 p.m., roughly 40 minutes after she had left the house to walk the dog. Although Austin initially said he hadn't heard from her, he admitted to seeing the message later, either because he hadn't noticed it right away or he had been out of network coverage at the time. The message contained a chilling statement. "They tried to kidnap me." Alarmed by this, Austin had immediately started searching for her, realizing the seriousness of the situation. Jennifer called her husband, who at work, alarmed. He left his job immediately to join the search. He joined Jennifer and Austin, and the three decided to split up to cover more ground along the routes April usually walked. Jennifer also contacted the police, who promptly joined the efforts to find April. Shortly afterward, April was found. A man and a woman jogging along one of the trails came across a dog on a leash. Penny the dog seemed extremely agitated when the woman attempted to grab the leash. Penny ran off, but stopped periodically. As if trying to guide them somewhere, they followed Penny into a dense thicket, where they discovered the body of a girl. The victim was later identified as 14-year-old April Millsap by the time her family arrived. Forensic experts were already working at the site. In Armada, the local police force consisted of only 2 officers, neither of whom was trained for cases of this nature. Serious crimes were almost unheard of in the area, and the small force was sufficient for handling minor issues like petty theft. However, this case was different. None of the local officers had ever dealt with a violent murder, and their investigative resources were minimal. The sheriff immediately reached out to more capable authorities at the county level. Law enforcement from other regions was quickly brought in to assist with the investigation. As they had more resources and experience, April was discovered lying on her back at the bottom of a ravine. Her shoes had been removed and were found a few meters away. Her clothing and underwear had been pulled off, suggesting a clear abuse motive. However, further investigation revealed that she had not been abused. Detectives theorized that the attacker may have attempted but failed, possibly because April fought back fiercely, or because something like a passerby or the dog interrupted the assault. Regardless, she was subjected to a brutal beating. Her body was covered in bruises, ranging from defensive wounds to severe injuries on her face, which was so disfigured it appeared almost crushed. The forensic examination identified at least 48 separate injuries, many concentrated on her face and neck. Her body was covered in dried blood. There were signs of compression on her neck, but they didn't match the typical patterns seen in manual strangulation or the use of an object. Instead, the injuries on her face and neck bore unusual marks, which forensic analysis confirmed were caused by the tread of a shoe. This indicated that the attacker had stomped on her repeatedly. The forensic report concluded that April's death was the result of being trampled. Marks resembling the sole of a large sneaker were found on her head and neck. Considering the level of violence and the potential motive, investigators believed the perpetrator was likely a large man. The forensic expert concluded that the attack lasted over 10 minutes, during which the girl endured immense agony before dying. Identifying the victim initially proved difficult due to the severe facial injuries, which rendered her unrecognizable. Similarly, her mother was already unidentifiable from the start. The girl's stepmother, boyfriend, and the boyfriend's friend were brought in for police questioning to narrow down the list of possible suspects. The initial investigation focused on her mother, Jennifer, to determine if there were any events or threats that could be related to the case. However, investigators quickly determined that Jennifer had no conflicts, troubles, or unusual events related to her daughter's death. After ruling this possibility out, they turned their attention to April's boyfriend, Austin. To continue to clarify the details of the case, suspicion arose when Austin admitted that his relationship with the victim had been strained recently. They argued often and were on the brink of breaking up shortly before the murder. They had a heated argument. Adding to investigators' doubts was a chilling message April had sent to Austin just before the crime. She told him that someone had attempted to kidnap her, but he chose to ignore this alarming warning. Austin claimed he couldn't respond because the message arrived too late for him to see it. It seems there was a delay in delivery. Detectives noted that after receiving the message, he reacted very slowly, did not inform the police, and instead decided to search for her on his own. Austin explained that he was still upset with his girlfriend and believed the message was an attempt to manipulate him. He thought she was trying to provoke his attention and concern, to push him toward reconciliation, not realizing the gravity of the situation regarding the quarrel. Austin insisted that April's behavior was incomprehensible. The most recent conflict had seemingly come out of nowhere, and he couldn't clearly explain the reasons behind their disagreements. Instead, he placed the blame on her. This only deepened the detective's suspicions, as it suggested Austin might have had a motive for the attack. In many cases, such incidents are committed by partners. As a result, the officers decided to detain him longer and asked him to tell them how his day went in all the details in order to analyze his movements and establish an alibi. Austin said that around 4 p.m., he met a friend to help carry a TV into a house. Afterward, they went to the nearest McDonald's for a snack. His account was later confirmed by surveillance camera footage from the cafe, which showed him there at the specified time, around 6:30 p.m. Just a few minutes after the message about the attempted kidnapping was sent, it became clear that Austin could not have been involved in the murder, since Austin was ruled out as the killer. Investigators turned their attention to the victim's mobile phone, hoping it might provide crucial information. They suspected April might have received a message from the stalker pursuing her, but her mobile phone could not be found at the crime scene. Detectives theorized that the killer had taken it, turned it off to prevent tracking, and discarded it elsewhere to find the phone and other evidence. A thorough search was conducted along the route April was believed to have taken, but no clues were initially found. Law enforcement, specialized dogs, and the FBI joined the search effort after nearly a full day of searching with no results. A breakthrough occurred the next day. The girl's mobile phone was discovered about a kilometer from the crime scene and was immediately sent to a forensic lab for analysis around the same time. News of the brutal attack spread widely through local newspapers and TV channels. Authorities appealed for witnesses who might have noticed anything unusual on the trail near the time of the crime. However, in the early stages, this only heightened public fear and anxiety. What shocked people most was the sheer brutality of the attack and the fact that it occurred in broad daylight, leaving everyone feeling unsafe. Then, a girl came forward to the police with potentially valuable information. She explained that around 6 p.m. on the day April was killed, she was at home looking out her window when she noticed a white van she had never seen before passing by. A man was driving, with another young man in the passenger seat. The van was moving very slowly, as if the occupants were searching for something or someone. This struck her as odd. When they noticed her watching from the window, they stopped and stared at her, even pointing toward her house. The encounter made her feel uneasy. Afterward, they drove away. Upon hearing about April's murder, the girl became worried that these two men might have been involved. She feared they could have spotted April as a target and attacked her. Detectives found this information reliable and important to the investigation. They considered it plausible that a white van had been driving around the area looking for a victim, and April was unfortunate enough to catch the men's attention. The police appealed to the public once again, sharing a description of the white van and a composite sketch of the two men inside, hoping to gather more reliable leads. The following day, a man and his friend contacted the police. They admitted to driving a van in the area that evening. They explained that they were construction workers and had been driving slowly through the neighborhood because the driver wanted to show his colleague some houses where he had previously worked. One of these houses happened to be where the girl lived. Their account was verified, and local residents confirmed their story. Clearing them of suspicion, the men were eager to assist the investigation in any way they could. The day after the incident, several people contacted the police to report a suspicious motorcycle and its driver. Witnesses reported seeing a schoolgirl walking her dog along a path around 6:30 p.m. They noted that she wasn't alone at the time. She was accompanied by an older man who was pushing his motorcycle by hand. The two appeared to be walking and talking casually at the time. The witnesses assumed the man was her father, as his behavior seemed calm and April showed no signs of fear. However, upon reflecting on the situation later, doubts about the man began to emerge. None of April's friends or family recognized him based on the description provided, suggesting he was a complete stranger to her, according to witnesses. This encounter occurred around the same time April had texted her boyfriend about an attempted kidnapping, raising further suspicions about the man, since there were very few motorcyclists in town. The man and his unusual motorcycle quickly caught the attention of locals. The motorcycle was described as having a rare blue and white color scheme, making it easy to identify thanks to this detailed description. Police located a motorcycle matching it just 3 days after April's murder, on April 27, 2014. It was found parked in the driveway of a local house. When officers arrived, the motorcycle was still there. The officers approached a man working in the garden, who told them the motorcycle did not belong to him. Instead, it belonged to his 32-year-old friend, James Donald Van Callis, who lived in the neighboring town. About 30 kilometers from Armada, this information was verified. On April 28, officers met with James, the owner of the motorcycle, to question him about his whereabouts on the day April was killed. From the start, James was cooperative and willing to answer all questions. He claimed he had been at a friend's house in Armada during that time, and his friend confirmed the alibi. However, authorities found the alibi unreliable, as the witness was a friend who might have been covering for him. Additionally, there were minor discrepancies in the timeline. When asked about the shoes he wore that day, James provided a pair of white sneakers. However, the tread on the shoes did not match the marks found on the victim's body. Detectives decided to take a closer look at James to eliminate him as a potential suspect. While he had a criminal record, it was not for violent offenses. His convictions included breaking, as well as failing to pay child support, and the robberies occurring in 2005 and 2006. However, upon reviewing James's background, the police uncovered something far more alarming. His father, James Bernard Van Callis, was a registered abuse offender. The elder James Bernard had been convicted of abusing a 13-year-old minor at the time. Both men lived in the same family home. Authorities considered the possibility that James Bernard and James Donald might be involved in criminal activities. However, the investigation primarily focused on the son, as witnesses had identified a middle-aged man matching the witness's description. Searches of their home revealed that James Bernard and James Donald were growing the territory of the prohibited plant. The quantity was so large that they were arrested and charged with distributing the prohibited banned substance. This allowed law enforcement to detain them, ensuring public safety and preventing the suspects from fleeing the state. While the investigation continued, the police thoroughly inspected all the shoes found in the men's house, but none matched the tread marks found on the victim's body. Additionally, numerous DNA tests were conducted on the clothing, but no traces linked to April were discovered. However, forensic experts who examined the motorcycle were confident that James Donald had used strong cleaning agents shortly before it was seized by the police for analysis. They suspected this was an attempt to remove evidence. James Donald was quite successful. As the police no traces were found, the detectives quickly confirmed their theory. When James Donald's girlfriend contacted the police, she reported that on the day of the murder, in April, she came home to find he meticulously cleaning his shoes, motorcycle, and helmet with strong disinfectants. This unusual behavior made her suspicious. The injuries on the victim's head were consistent with marks that could have been caused by a helmet, leading investigators to believe James Donald might have used it during the assault. She also revealed that he had traveled by car that day to a nearby town where the victim lived, supposedly to visit his friend. James Donald's girlfriend described a pair of black and white sneakers that James Donald frequently wore and loved. However, these shoes did not match the ones he handed over to detectives when they questioned him. After that night, she never saw those sneakers again, leading her to believe James Donald had disposed of them. Fearing he couldn't fully clean away the evidence, she further detailed her troubling relationship with James Donald, describing him as extremely abusive and controlling. Recently, she had felt more like his hostage or property than his girlfriend. He tightly controlled every aspect of her life, even forbidding her from leaving the house unless he accompanied her. She suspected him from the start, but feared he would kill her if she contacted the police. Now that James Bernard and James Donald had been arrested, she could finally speak freely. According to James Donald's own admission to his girlfriend, he claimed he was cleaning his belongings because they had been stained with machine oil while fixing his motorbike. However, she remained unconvinced. The police needed to confirm that the sneakers she described matched the ones James Donald commonly wore. They found photos on his social media page showing him wearing sneakers identical to her description, although James Donald had disposed of the pair he wore during the murder. The police located and purchased the same model when they compared the tread pattern to the marks on the victim's body. Forensic experts found an exact match. The investigation revealed that April had been trampled to death with shoes James Donald had purchased about a year before the attack. Further evidence was found on his computer, where investigators uncovered his disturbing interest in much younger girls. Additionally, crucial information came from April's phone using FBI lab analysis. It was discovered that she had a fitness app installed, which monitored her movements, steps, and heart rate, among other data. Shortly after sending a worrying message to her boyfriend, Austin, the data showed she suddenly began running, as if trying to escape from someone. James Donald reportedly approached the girl on his motorcycle and offered her something. Shortly afterward, she sent her boyfriend a message about an attempted kidnapping. Then she ran really fast to escape her pursuer. Minutes later, her fitness app recorded a sudden, chaotic, and extremely fast increase in her movements, lasting 10 to 15 minutes. This appears to have been the moment she fought for her life. Later, the criminal returned to his vehicle with the April's phone. The app recorded a steady speed of about 20 kilometers per hour, which continued until the phone was discarded about a kilometer from the attack site. Surveillance cameras along the biker's route captured footage of the motorcycle and identified the suspect as 32-year-old James Donald. Additionally, geolocation data from his mobile phone confirmed that, at the time of the attack, he was not with a friend, as he claimed, but near the crime scene. By this point, everyone was certain of his involvement in the murder. There was enough evidence to charge him with April's murder and proceed to court. However, a significant challenge remained: the lack of direct evidence. The police were unable to find any DNA linking James Donald to the victim. Of course, against this background, lawyers could effectively refer to indirectly provided evidence. Forensic experts were unable to find traces of the victim's blood on his belongings, equipment, or helmet. James Donald had meticulously cleaned everything and disposed of all incriminating items. It was clear that the man was highly experienced in this case. The prosecutor's office decided to proceed with the charges despite relying on indirect evidence. These evidences was enough to convince the jury of James Donald's guilt in October 2014. 3 months after the crime, James was formally charged, and the trial was scheduled for early 2016. It was believed that he attacked a teenage girl, April. After she rejected his advances, James Donald had spent considerable time online researching ways to attract much younger girls, particularly minors, but none of the advice seemed to work. Tragically, when April refused him, he reacted violently and attacked her. The defense argued that the prosecution lacked definitive proof of James's guilt and claimed the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence, although James maintained his innocence. His arguments were unconvincing. As a last resort, his lawyer emphasized that James Donald had no prior record of serious crimes. However, this was not enough to sway the jury. After several hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found him guilty of attempted kidnapping, abuse, and first-degree murder. James Donald Van Callis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, April's mother spoke extensively she expressed her satisfaction with the court's decision, relieved that the perpetrator would never be released. She was horrified that her child's life had been taken by an adult man simply because his advances were rejected. His actions and intentions were criminal from the start, but the level of cruelty he displayed was unimaginable. Despite this, James refused to admit his guilt or show any remorse. He continued to claim his innocence. Even after his conviction, he attempted to overturn the court's decision by filing an appeal with his lawyer. But it was unsuccessful. Now, he remains in prison for committing a heinous crime against an innocent young girl, April Millsap, in April's memory. A memorial garden was created near the spot where her life was tragically taken. A small statue of her dog, Penny, stands in the garden to honor the pet who led strangers to the scene of the crime. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Lauren Kanarek. Michael Barrassone, an Olympic equestrian champion, was regarded as one of the world's top trainers. He coached other Olympic athletes and represented the USA at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Barrassone owns two beautiful horse farms, one outside Palm Beach and one in New Jersey's prime horse country. He calls this one Hawthorne Hill, a paradise for horse enthusiasts. The property housed dozens of horses that required constant care. Lauren Kanarek contacted Michael with the dream of becoming an equestrian champion. Her passion for horses began at the age of 3, when she and her parents visited a small horse farm in Wellington, Florida. Seeing a horse for the first time left a lasting impression, and from that moment, she couldn't stop thinking about these animals. As she grew older, her desire to pursue equestrian sports only strengthened. Recognizing her passion, Lauren's father bought her first horse as a graduation gift, allowing her to fully embrace the hobby she loved. In March 2018, at an equestrian competition, Lauren caught the attention of Michael after her performance. Michael approached her and invited her to train at his equestrian club in New Jersey for Lauren, who was actively searching for the best trainer. This was an incredible opportunity. She was thrilled by the chance to train at Michael's prestigious club. However, no one could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead for both Michael and Lauren as they worked together. The one thing they undeniably shared was a deep, mutual love for horses. By that time, Lauren owned 2 horses. Michael spoke passionately about his equestrian club, saying, "This was my life. It was my home. I built it from scratch. It was my love." Michael provided Lauren with accommodations at his farm in New Jersey, where she moved in with her boyfriend, Rob Goodwin. They agreed that Lauren would pay Michael $5 a month for her training and housing. Lauren stayed in a white farmhouse that Michael shared with his assistants, Justin Harden and Mary Haskins Gray, who also worked in the equestrian field. Michael and Mary were not just colleagues. They were in a romantic relationship. Mary, who was divorced, had 2 children from her previous marriage, a daughter and a son. The group lived together peacefully, and Michael had a good relationship with everyone. For Lauren, it seemed as though her childhood dreams had come true, and her life appeared to be going well. She even shared photos on social network of herself with Michael, believing everything was perfect. However, her coach found her to be a challenging and demanding student. Stable workers noted that by the summer of 2019, tensions had risen between Michael and Lauren. The issues began when most of Lauren's sessions were led by his assistants, Justin and Mary. Lauren had hoped to train directly with the Olympic champion, not with his assistants. Each day, the atmosphere on the farm seemed to become increasingly intense, as though something terrible was about to happen. Lauren and Mary's relationship became increasingly strained. Lauren resented Michael for spending more time with Mary and wanted all his attention for herself. Unwilling to let anyone stand in her way, Michael understands the conflict but doesn't want to push Lauren away since she pays him every month. At the same time, he wanted to protect his romantic relationship with Mary. Frustrated, Lauren wasn't willing to accept the situation. Lauren, an active social network user, quickly launched an online campaign She shared a narrative using a chessboard analogy. Michael was portrayed as the king trapped and defeated, while Mary was depicted as the queen who would need to be sacrificed to protect the castle. The stables. 2 weeks later, Lauren posted a message. Anyone who continuously kicks a sleeping beast will sooner or later wake it up. Tensions in the Hawthorne Hill had reached a breaking point. Lauren expressed her growing concern for her horse's well-being to her father, saying, "They're the reason I wake up in the morning, and the reason I can't sleep at night." She believed her horses were being mistreated, claiming they were either underfed or overfed. Meanwhile, Michael's staff accused Lauren of violating the barn's rules, with one stable worker alleging that they had seen her sneaking into the barn at night. Rumors began to circulate that she was planning to do something with the horses. Lauren defended herself, explaining that one of her horses required special care. She and her boyfriend, Rob, hid a recording device in the barn. As Lauren claimed, she felt unsafe around Michael's staff. At the same time, she posted another angry message on social network, accusing Michael of racism and homophobia. Michael, enraged by the accusations, vehemently denied them, fearing the damage they could do to his career. The Olympic champion, who had worked for years to build his reputation, was terrified that everything he had achieved was being undermined. In her next post, Lauren claimed that the 6'3" man had been bullying her, leaving her fearful for her safety. However, there were no witnesses to support her allegations, which worked in Michael's favor. The stable staff, unaware of the full story, feared that something terrible might happen. Michael revealed that living with Lauren and her boyfriend under the same roof had become intolerable. He asked Lauren to take her belongings, including her horses, and leave with Rob. However, Lauren had no intention of leaving. Eventually, Michael and Mary decided to leave the house themselves. They relocated to Michael's winter property, just 30 minutes from Palm Beach, Florida. Mary's daughter was sent to camp, while her son went to live with his biological father, as staying together with the children no longer felt safe. On July 31, 2019, at 9 p.m., Michael called the police, saying, "There's a war going on, and it needs to be dealt with right now. I've had enough. They threw us out of our home, and I need to deal with this tonight. I need them to leave." The police dismissed the call as a standard landlord-tenant dispute and did not intervene. Michael later described his turmoil, saying, "My paradise had turned into hell. I walked outside and circled the house all night. Without stopping, it was like that every day. I wasn't sleeping, and I wasn't eating." Lauren continued her online harassment, posting another message on social network filled with accusations and threats. On August 3, 2019, at 9:35 a.m., Michael contacted the police again, stating, "They're crazy, they're stalking us, and we're afraid for our lives." However, Lauren's father dismissed Michael's calls to the police as fabrications. It was later revealed that Lauren had filed a complaint with Safe Sport, an organization that investigates misconduct in sports. Accusing Michael and Mary of mistreating her, Lauren alleged that Michael had intimidated and verbally abused her, though she did not accuse him of physical violence. On August 7, 2019, a van arrived at Michael's home, and a woman stepped out. She turned out to be a social worker from the New Jersey Department of Children and Families. She approached Michael and asked, "I need to speak with Ms. Mary. Where can I find her?" Michael called Mary over. The social worker intended to check on Mary's children, but the children were not at home at the time. The barn staff reassured the social worker that the children were well cared for and treated kindly by Michael and Mary. Social worker confirmed that there were no social problems in their family. However, the implication of potential harm toward children deeply upset Michael. Feeling pushed to his limit, he decided to take decisive action. Inside his office, Michael opened a safe and took out a black and pink weapon. He left the house, got into his truck, and drove down the gravel road to the farm where the Lauren and Rob were staying. What happened next remains uncertain, but at 2:13 p.m. that day, Lauren called 911, struggling to breathe. She said, "I've been attacked in the heart Michael Barrasone attacked me. Please help," while she was on the call. The sounds of a fight between Rob and Michael could be heard in the background. When the police arrived, they found Rob holding a badly beaten Michael down on the ground. Rob had the weapon in his possession. The officers immediately handcuffed Michael. Lauren was in critical condition. Lying on her back, pale and nearly gray, she was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. Doctors were uncertain if she had suffered brain damage. To stabilize her, Lauren was placed in a medically induced coma and connected to tubes supporting her body. Meanwhile, Michael was also hospitalized. When he woke up in a hospital bed, he saw himself handcuffed to the bed rail. He claimed to have no memory of attack Lauren, as if his mind had been completely wiped the following day. Michael Barrasone was charged with attempted murder and faced the possibility of an 80-year prison sentence. Confused and furious, he couldn't understand how it had all happened. Lauren remained in a coma for 4 days, followed by 3 weeks in the intensive care unit, unable to speak due to being on a ventilator. She eventually recovered enough to talk to the police after being moved to a regular hospital room. Lauren explained that Michael had been hiding behind a bush near her back porch, unaware that he had a weapon. She approached him and started talking. Suddenly, Michael pulled out the weapon and attacked her twice. Rob was nearby, witnessed the attack. Rob stated that Michael also attacked at Rob, but missed after Rob hitting him on the head, a blow that was likely the cause of his memory loss. Rob stating, Lauren didn't have time to say anything to Michael before he pulled out the weapon. He wasn't there to talk, he was there to kill them. Meanwhile, Michael's defense argued that Lauren had deliberately driven him to a mental breakdown. Mary testified during the trial, describing the summer of 2019 as a particularly difficult time. She said Michael was anxious, frightened, and frequently panicked. Michael spent over 2 years in prison until spring 2022. His high-profile trial eventually began and lasted nearly 3 weeks. During her testimony, Lauren was asked if she had ever planned to ruin Michael. She admitted, at some point, yes. Michael's defense team employed a rare strategy, arguing that he had temporarily become insane and was mentally unbalanced. The doctors asserted that Lauren gaslit him, manipulated his perception of reality, and drove him beyond his breaking point. However, Nagel, Lauren's attorney, suggesting that Michael's memory lapse was selective, affecting only the crime itself while leaving other memories intact. Final. The court found Michael Barrasone not guilty of committing a crime against Lauren Kanarek. The jury concluded that, at the time of the incident, Michael was not mentally stable. He was not held criminally liable for his actions on that day at the equestrian club. The judge declared Michael the true victim in the story. After the verdict, Michael burst into tears and collapsed into his lawyer's arms. His legal team rejoiced, calling it justice. Michael considers the day of the verdict the best day of his life. Reflecting afterward, Michael said, "I was lost. I'm like a rudderless ship. The world as I knew it is gone. So now I have to build a new world." Lauren's lawyer is determined to seek justice and refuses to give up. He firmly believes the court's decision is unreasonable and considers Michael a criminal who deserves the maximum penalty. Lauren's father also believes the jury was wrong and insists that Michael should be sentenced to life imprisonment. A few weeks after the verdict, Michael was transferred to a psychiatric hospital. After undergoing evaluation at the psychiatric hospital, Judge Stephen Taylor ruled that Michael should be moved to a less restrictive facility. His supporters remain hopeful that he will soon be allowed to return home. In November 2023, Michael was released, but still requires regular psychiatric treatment. Meanwhile, after enduring several rounds of surgeries and treatments, Lauren has returned to horseback riding. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Manijay Staran. Manijay Staran was born on May 23, 1989. Little is known about her childhood, except that she had an older brother by the age of 34. She was living in a small apartment and struggling financially. She also dealt with mental health issues. Manijay worked hard to overcome these challenges to create a safe and comfortable environment for her children. But it was a difficult journey. Her relatives had to help care for her children. Her life continued without major changes until something unexpected happened. On May 1, 2023, the St. Paul police received a disturbing call from Manijay's father. He had last spoken to her on April 23, and she seemed very scared. He believed that she was afraid of her boyfriend. The police began searching for her, but did not find her in her apartment. A man who claimed to be the father of one of Manijay's children also reported that he had not heard from her for a long time. It was unusual for her to go silent for so long, as she was in regular contact with him because they had a child together, according to him. Their last conversation had been on April 21, 2023. The police also spoke with a neighbor of Manijay's who had disturbing information. One day, she noticed a bruise under Manijay's eye and a red mark on her neck. When the neighbor asked if she had been attacked, Manijay confirmed that she had. The neighbor suggested calling the police, but Manijay begged her not to, fearing it would make things worse. This allegation of assault further complicated the investigation and added to the complexity of Manijay's situation. A number of important pieces of information were uncovered, revealing that Manijay had a boyfriend named Joseph Stephen Jorgensen, who frequently visited her apartment, although his last name was not listed on the lease. The manager provided the police with his phone number. It was confirmed that the phone number belonged to Joseph, a man in his 40s. The manager identified him in a photo, confirming that he was the one who had visited Manijay. This discovery was a major development in the case. The police obtained recordings from surveillance cameras located near the apartment, which provided crucial evidence. At 6 p.m. on April 23, the cameras recorded Manijay, clearly upset. Hurriedly leaving her apartment, she was quickly tackled by Joseph, who pulled her inside. This is the last recorded footage. Video analysis showed Joseph frequently entering and exiting the apartment between April 21 and April 28. The manager raised concerns when he mentioned that there was only one set of keys for residents, despite the footage clearly showing Joseph using his own key to open the door each time. At approximately 5 p.m. on April 28, Joseph was caught on camera leaving the apartment with a suitcase and a duffel bag. He loaded the luggage into a pickup truck and drove away quickly. Police later discovered that the truck belonged to a resident of the apartment building. Police also spoke with a friend of Manijay, who had valuable information about her lifestyle and her relationship with Joseph. The friend explained that although Manijay struggled with drug addiction, she always kept in touch with her family and never went more than a day without contacting them. Therefore, her absence for several days raised alarms. The friend also recounted a phone conversation with Joseph after Manijay went missing. Joseph claimed that Manijay went to the store but did not return, according to the family friend. Joseph expressed concern that a man named Kyle might pose a threat to Manijay. After Manijay went missing, Joseph took no action. He did not report her absence to the police and continued with his daily life. He was the last person to be in the apartment before she went missing. Concerned and with mounting evidence, police entered Manijay's apartment with the building manager and quickly discovered alarming signs. The bedroom window was broken. In the living room, they found a television with a severely cracked screen, which the manager confirmed had never been damaged before. As they continued their search, police found broken glass on the microwave, with shards scattered throughout the bedroom. The mattress had a large hole in it, and there were red marks on the bed, which raised suspicions. The anxiety surrounding Manijay's disappearance grew, revealing a troubling array of evidence. On May 25, after completing the necessary legal procedures, officers obtained a search warrant and processed Manijay's apartment for vital evidence. Experts discovered a disturbing scene. There was a large amount of blood in the living room and kitchen, especially on the sofa and floor. Police confirmed that efforts had been made to clean up the scene. It was clear that someone had been seriously injured or possibly dead in the apartment. Preliminary analysis confirmed that blood samples taken from the scene belonged to Manijay. As officers continued their investigation, they uncovered important information about her finances. They discovered that she had received government assistance in Minnesota through electronic benefit transfers, which allow recipients to make purchases directly at retail stores. Police quickly realized the significance of this discovery and obtained a warrant to access Manijay's account records. They found a series of transactions made after her disappearance. One notable transaction occurred on May 9, 2023, when Joseph used Manijay's card to withdraw cash from a highway ATM. That same day, he made a purchase at a store, buying items such as a cleaning bucket, 2 boxes of paper towels, trash bags, liquid detergent, gloves, and disinfectant wipes. The strange combination of items aroused the police's suspicions. On May 11, Joseph used Manijay's card again. This time at a grocery store. He also went to a hardware store, where he purchased more paper towels, cleaning supplies, and disinfectant wipes. The repeated purchases of these items further raised concerns about Joseph's actions and intentions. Police obtained a warrant to access information associated with Joseph's Google account. After reviewing the data, they discovered a series of significant internet searches made by him. On May 1, he searched for how to report a missing person. On May 3, Joseph searched for methods to delete files. On May 23, he inquired about removing Jeeps from a scooter. Finally, on June 4, he read about lime for soil. It is important to note that lime is a substance that can accelerate the decomposition of a body and eliminate the associated odor. The investigation team was aware of this, raising their concerns about Joseph's potential involvement in Manijay's disappearance. With compelling evidence against him, they obtained a search warrant for his home. On June 26, a special weapons and tactics team arrived at Joseph's home, prepared for a potentially dangerous situation. When police confronted him in the apartment, he resisted and barricaded himself in his bedroom, shocking everyone present. He lit a fire to escalate the situation. The special weapons and tactics team proceeded with extreme caution, but were unable to apprehend him. He resisted aggressively and even attempted to grab one of the officers' weapons. Joseph was eventually restrained and taken to a local hospital for evaluation to rule out any mental health issues that might have influenced his behavior at the time of his arrest. There were 2 other people in the apartment, including an unidentified woman. She was injured, with bruises, scratches, and a red mark on her neck. The woman later reported to the police that Joseph had choked her and threatened her with violence, claiming that the neighbors would not hear her screams. The second person living in the apartment was Joseph's roommate. When the task force arrived, he hid in his bedroom, where he was discovered and arrested. He later informed the St. Paul Police Department that he had suffered a traumatic brain injury, which had resulted in a loss of smell. He also mentioned his long-standing relationship with Joseph and explained that, due to his busy Monday through Friday work schedule, he rarely interacted with Joseph or the women Joseph brought to the apartment. The roommate also noted that he had only met Manijay once or twice and emphasized that he did not have a close relationship with her. When the roommate asked Joseph about Manijay's whereabouts, Joseph told him that she had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. The man also admitted that he had used Manijay's money. Joseph had given him her card and PIN, leading him to believe that he had access to the account. Police interviewed the manager of the residential complex where Joseph lived. He reported that on May 15 or 16, 2023, residents complained about a foul odor coming from Joseph's apartment. The manager noted that it resembled the stench of a dead animal. To determine the source of the odor, on May 18, the manager and a maintenance worker attempted to enter Joseph's apartment to investigate. However, Joseph acted aggressively and blocked their path. The manager then instructed Joseph and his roommate to clean the apartment and gave them a week to do so. Shortly thereafter, both the manager and maintenance staff saw Joseph carrying large black duffel bags out of the apartment. The sight shocked witnesses, who began to speculate about what might be in the bags. the forensic team from the St. Paul Police Department conducted an investigation of Joseph's apartment. During the search, they discovered more evidence. Their report noted a significant amount of blood in the bathroom and in his closet. There was a foul odor in his home that matched the odors reported by residents. They also discovered other biological material found in the home. After arresting Joseph, the police accessed Jeep's data from his phone, which pointed to a storage facility where Joseph rented a room with a refrigerator through his roommate. Realizing the importance of this clue, they obtained a search warrant for the storage facility. On June 28, the police began investigating the location. As they approached the storage facility, they immediately smelled a very unpleasant odor. The police decided to cut the lock to gain access. Once inside, they discovered containers wrapped in plastic, a blue gym bag, and a small suitcase. Notably, one of these bags was similar to the one Joseph was seen carrying out of Manage's apartment in the surveillance footage. They also found a green bag containing cleaning products similar to those Joseph had previously purchased, sitting on top of the refrigerator. On the advice of forensic experts, the police carefully removed the containers and sports bags from the refrigerator, from which the foul odor was emanating. The contents were inaccessible until they were sent to the medical examiner for further analysis. After X-rays were taken, it was discovered that all of the containers contained human remains. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner then conducted an autopsy and determined that all of the body parts were carefully packaged, wrapped in multiple layers of paper, film, and bags. Opening these packed remains was a laborious process. Tests confirmed that the remains belonged to Manijay Starin. With identification made through her tattoos and dental records, the police again reviewed surveillance footage from Manijay's home. Focusing on the bags Joseph carried, he had handling of the body Manijay's in her apartment. Sorting her remains into different bags and carrying them out, Joseph faces multiple charges, including second-degree murder and arson for setting fire to his apartment during a confrontation with the Special Weapons and Tactics team. He is also charged with threatening and disarming a police officer. On June 30, 2023, Joseph Stephen Jorgensen had an afternoon court hearing regarding the murder charge. Throughout the trial, Joseph shook his head while listening to the assistant district attorney announce that his bail was set at $5 million. The judge remained largely silent throughout the proceedings. Joseph's attorney requested a bail hearing for later. It is believed that a detailed defense strategy is currently being developed. On the same day, Joseph appeared in court. St. Paul Police Sergeant Ernster held a press conference to discuss a significant event that occurred during the ongoing investigation. Fanta Zayavong was also reported missing. She was last seen in July 2021 with Joseph. This new information prompted the police to immediately begin searching for her. During the press conference, it was announced that Fanta Zayavong's remains had been discovered in a separate storage facility in North Minneapolis, approximately 30 miles from where Manijay's body was found. Details about the second victim have not been released, but many believe that Joseph was directly involved in her murder. Manijay's family has expressed gratitude to the police for any leads in the ongoing investigation. If Joseph is convicted of second-degree murder, he could face a maximum sentence of 40 years in prison. His next court appearance, originally scheduled for August 21, has been postponed for unknown reasons. Joseph Stephen Jorgensen remains in custody at the Ramsey County Jail. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Michelle Linehan. In 1994, Michelle Linehan, then known as Michelle Hughes, left Louisiana and moved to New York to work for a modeling agency. However, her stay in New York did not last long, and Michelle quickly changed her career path. When she moved to Alaska, she began working as a stripper at the Great Alaskan Bush Company, which not only brought in a substantial income, but also helped her attract the attention of many men who wanted to marry her here. Michelle continued this work for several months until she met Kent Lepink. Kent appeared modest and reserved, but Michelle's parents described him as impulsive and prone to losing control. Like Michelle, Kent was also trying to start over. After being caught stealing money from his family's business in Michigan, he fled to Alaska. Seeing it as the perfect place to leave his troubles behind, Kent believed meeting Michelle was fate. The two began dating immediately, and within a month, Kent proposed. However, Michelle wasn't in a hurry to give him an answer. When Kent introduced Michelle to his parents, they immediately noticed that she seemed distant toward him. When he hugged her, she instinctively pulled away, making it clear that Michelle didn't truly love Kent. His mother began to suspect that Michelle had been seeing other men, and what Kent's mother felt was right. When traveling salesman Scott Hilka met Michelle at the club in late 1994, he too fell in love with her. They quickly developed a deep relationship. Then, in the summer of 1995, a widower named John Carlin entered the picture. John, a single father who had recently lost his wife to cancer, although soon discovered Michelle's other relationships. He had already fallen in love with her and also proposed. Remarkably, both Kent and John, the two men, were aware of each other for several months. John, Kent, and Michelle even lived in the same house in Anchorage. This wasn't just a love triangle, it was a complex web of relationships. People at the strip club where Michelle worked believed she was simply skilled at manipulating others. She took full advantage of her relationships, receiving money, lavish gifts, and financial support from her admirers. Other dancers didn't find the gifts unusual, as club patrons often gave such presents to gain the women's attention. However, no one truly believed Michelle intended to marry any of these men. All of them were at least 10 years older than her, but she had a way of charming each one. She skillfully played her game, knowing exactly how to manipulate and control the men in her life. Michelle insisted that she never asked for more than what they were willing and able to give. Meanwhile, Kent remained hopeful and genuinely believed he was preparing for a wedding with Michelle. In preparation for this momentous occasion, Kent's father planned to travel to Anchorage in the spring of 1996 to meet his future daughter-in-law. However, shortly before his arrival, she suddenly disappeared. When Kent's father reached Anchorage, he found his son in a state of grief. After a brief visit, he returned to Michigan without fulfilling his purpose. On May 2, 1996, Kent's body was discovered along a deserted road. 80 miles south of Anchorage, he had been attacked 3 times, in the back, chest, and head. His body was found by accident when electricians working nearby noticed his bright red jacket. That same day, a letter arrived at his parents' home. The letter contained instructions that it should only be opened in the event of his death. When his parents received the letter, they immediately tried to contact him, but were unable to reach him. The exact time of Kent's death could not be determined, but forensic experts estimated that he had died 1 or 2 days before his body was discovered. Shell casings were found near the body, but the murder weapon was missing. When the Lepink family learned of the tragedy, Kent's mother immediately remembered the letter her son had left behind, still sealed as he had instructed. At the same time, investigators at the crime scene were unaware that critical evidence was not there, but was instead in the possession of Kent's parents. The letter said that if he died under suspicious circumstances, John, Michelle, or Scott Hilka could be held responsible. He also requested one more thing, which was to ensure that Michelle would spend a long time in prison. Kent clearly suspected Michelle and one of her lovers of plotting to kill him. His parents immediately contacted the police and handed over the letter he had written. When detectives opened the envelope, they quickly realized that this case would be anything but straightforward. The letter provided critical clues and leads, prompting them to thoroughly investigate everyone involved in the love triangle. Scott said he was surprised to learn he was being investigated. As he was not in Alaska at the time of the murder, investigators reviewed all airline and phone records and determined that Scott was not in Alaska. so he was cleared of any involvement in Kent's death the following day. Detectives questioned a woman, Kent's close friend. At the police station, she broke down in tears upon learning that Kent had been violently killed. During her questioning, she revealed that Kent owned a weapon and mentioned a significant detail. Kent had a $1 million life insurance policy, with Michelle listed as the beneficiary. This could be Michelle's motive for harming Kent. However, investigators discovered that just days before his death, Kent had removed Michelle as the beneficiary. Meanwhile, Michelle was unaware and still had a motive for the murder. A few days after Kent's body was found, police searched his car and discovered another envelope in the glove compartment. This letter seemed to be a correspondence between Michelle and John Carlin. In it, they discussed how John had supposedly bought a cabin at Lake Tahoe and invited Michelle to spend the weekend there. However, detectives uncovered that John hadn't actually purchased any property. It was a lie. The whole situation seemed staged, as if John and Michelle were exchanging messages designed for Kent to find. The letter appeared intended to provoke Kent's jealousy and prompt him to travel to the lake, near where Kent's body was found. But why would they do this? Was it a trap to lure Kent? According to the police, the plan seemed to have worked. Kent had apparently become jealous, and it all ended with 3 weapon wounds. The problem was that this was all based on speculation, no concrete evidence, no witnesses, and not even the murder weapon. A few months into the investigation, the lead investigators were reassigned to another precinct, causing the case to lose momentum and eventually come to a complete halt despite several pieces of circumstantial evidence. No charges were ever filed. At the time, Hilka was living in California. Carlin and Michelle each left shortly after the murders. Michelle settled in Olympia, Washington, seemingly starting a new life and leaving her past behind. After moving to Olympia, Michelle began attending college, pursuing studies in biology and psychology. She later earned a master's degree in public administration. In 1998, she married a young doctor named Colin Linehan in New Orleans, and they welcomed a daughter a year later. In 2004, a new cold case unit was formed in Alaska to reopen unsolved cases. The 8-year-old crime quickly became a priority. As evidence strongly pointed toward Michelle and John, Michelle became the main suspect in planning the murder, while John was believed to be the one who pulled the trigger. For 8 years, the case remained inactive until new detectives showed up at Michelle's suburban home. They asked her to clarify some statements she had made following the murder. By then, Michelle was no longer working as a stripper. She admitted that she had only viewed the job as a temporary way to make money and had left it behind as soon as she could. Colin, a successful physician, was just as shocked as Michelle when the police arrived at their door. By that time, they had been together for 6 years and were living a stable, fulfilling life that seemed to embody the American dream. However, this perfect image was now in jeopardy in Olympia. Michelle's friends were stunned to learn that behind her image as a perfect mother, churchgoer, parent-teacher committee member, businesswoman, and devoted wife, there was a tumultuous past. Authorities began preparing to seize several personal computers used by Michelle, although much of the data on the computers had been deleted. Investigators managed to recover a significant portion. Among the restored files were emails and correspondence between Michelle, Kent, John, and Scott Hilka. It became clear that Michelle had captivated the hearts of all 3 men, telling each one he was the most important person in her life while dismissing the others as mere toys to cover her expenses. These revelations exposed the manipulative dynamics of their relationships, but did not provide enough solid evidence to charge her with murder. There were, however, incriminating findings in the case. Investigators focused on a letter sent the day before the murder, which discussed Seychelles, a country offering citizenship for a substantial fee. The key detail in the letter was Michelle's question about whether Seychelles had an extradition agreement with the US, and if it would extradite criminals. However, this alone was not enough to press charges, adding to the complexity. The murder weapon was identified as a .44 caliber Desert Eagle, a distinctive weapon initially. John denied ever owning such a weapon, however. A surprising witness came forward, John's son, who was a child at the time of the crime but had grown into an adult by 2005. He decided to assist in the investigation of this decades-old case, which he had partially witnessed. The son revealed that shortly before the murder, his father had purchased a weapon after seeing a newspaper ad. He claimed to have seen the weapon the day after Kent was killed. It was in the bathroom sink, being cleaned with some kind of chemical, and his father appeared to be handling it carefully. The son could not identify the weapon's model or describe its appearance in this tangled love triangle orchestrated by the dancer. It seemed possible that John had been the one to acquire the weapon from the beginning of the investigation. Michele insisted that she was cooperating with law enforcement and denied any involvement in Kent's death. By the fall of 2006, investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence to charge both Michele and John Carlin with first-degree murder. Michele was able to post bail immediately and return to her family in Washington while awaiting trial. Although she was required to wear an ankle monitor and adhere to strict restrictions, John, however, was denied bail and spent 6 months in custody before the trial, maintaining his innocence throughout. In court, the prosecutors portrayed Michele as a cunning manipulator who sought to profit from the romantic entanglements she had created. Michele's attorneys argued that the case against her was based entirely on circumstantial evidence, giving them hope for a favorable verdict. John's legal team, on the other hand, shifted suspicion to others, even accusing John's own son, who had testified against him. They claimed Michele was the true mastermind behind the murder, a manipulative seductress who orchestrated the crime, possibly by court, convincing someone else to carry it out. The defense proposed several theories, including the claim that Michele herself had killed Kent, one of her lovers. To collect a $1 million insurance payout, the prosecution argued that John had spent a large amount of money on Michele, whom he deeply loved. When one of her other lovers pulled away, they claimed the only obstacle between John and his happiness with Michele was Kent. Prosecutors alleged that John and Michele had crafted a plan involving a fake letter to lure Kent to the location where he was murdered. Asserting that this letter had set the crime into motion, John contended that the letter was merely a joke created by Michele to make Kent jealous and end their relationship. The prosecution went on to present Michele's exchanges with her lovers, including one between her and John, who stated that he would do anything for her, even risk his life. To the prosecution, this suggested that her lovers might have been willing to commit murder for her. They also highlighted emails referencing the Seychelles and escaping justice, which they argued reinforced their case. The defense countered that, aside from circumstantial evidence, most of the emails were vague and open to multiple interpretations. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found John Carlin guilty of first-degree murder. John was sentenced to 99 years in prison when Michele's trial began. She claimed that she never considered Kent her fiancé, as she had repeatedly turned down his marriage proposals and had agreed only to marry Scott. However, Scott and Michele's relationship fell apart before the crime occurred. The defense argued that Kent had significant personal issues. Claiming he had become a nuisance to Michele, they alleged that he stalked her, monitored her every move, gathered information about her bank accounts and phone records, knew her social security number, and even read her emails. Over time, Michele reportedly realized he was stalking her and began to fear him. She supported these claims, which angered Kent's parents, who accused her of distorting the story. Michele's defenders also described Kent as an unusual individual who had been struggling with mental health problems. They attributed the disturbing letters he sent home to his mental state at the time. The defense attempted to clarify Kent's misconceptions regarding his relationship with Michele. He was fully preparing for a wedding despite her refusal. In the end, it was supposedly too difficult for him to acknowledge that he had been so mistaken, and thus, revenge seemed like a viable option to him. However, the defense argued that this did not make Michele a bad person, let alone a murderer. They also raised concerns about the email exchanges, contending that it was inappropriate to edit or delete portions of the messages to leave only incriminating statements. The defense further disputed the assertion that Michele had committed the crime or that she was the mastermind behind it. Under Alaska law, if it could be proven that Michele was involved in planning the murder, her actions would legally be considered equivalent to pulling the trigger. Even the attorneys expressed concerns that Michele's past might prevent the jury from recognizing her as the educated wife and mother she had become. Surprisingly, a former dancer who had worked with Michele at a club testified for the prosecution. This witness kept a detailed diary in which she noted the favorite films of her friends and acquaintances. She claimed that Michele was particularly obsessed with the 1994 film, The Last Seduction, a story that paralleled Kent's case. In the movie, the female protagonist manipulates her lover into killing her husband to collect insurance money. The witness asserted that Michele often referred to this film as her favorite, admired the lead character, and aspired to be like her. The defense disputed the testimony, stating that Michele did not have access to a weapon matching the one used in the crime. Additionally, the defense argued that Michele had taken steps to remove herself from Kent's insurance policy shortly before the murder. The prosecution countered this claim, arguing that Michele was not canceling her involvement, but merely clarifying beneficiary details. However, Kent had already changed the beneficiaries before his death, leaving Michele with nothing. During the hearings, Michele remained calm and chose not to testify before the jury, consistently asserting her innocence and claiming she had nothing to hide. The defense presented her husband, Colin, as a key witness to challenge the claim that Michele could be a murderer or the mastermind behind the crime. Colin played a crucial role in defending Michele's character, which the prosecution had tried to tarnish. He shared that, although he was aware of Michele's past work as a stripper, he admired her determination to take that job to pay for college and create a better future for herself. The defense argued that the prosecution's case against Michele relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and lacked any concrete proof. The trial lasted 5 weeks, followed by 2 days of jury deliberation. On October 22, 2007, Michele was convicted of first-degree murder. The verdict was devastating for Michele. Her fiancé Colin and their daughter, Kent's relatives, feel relieved and partially fulfill Kent's last wish before he was killed. Michele's attorney, however, was determined to keep fighting. The defense team filed an appeal, focusing on the missing murder weapon and the questionable evidence used to convict her. The rare weapon, believed to have been used to kill Kent, could potentially exonerate her, but it had not been found even more than a decade after the crime. After John Carlin began serving his sentence, he reportedly admitted to owning a weapon matching the description, a Desert Eagle of the same caliber as the murder weapon. John claimed he had lied earlier out of fear, believing he was being hunted and would be jailed based on his testimony. According to him, his weapon went missing shortly before the crime, but later reappeared. He explained that he had been forced to clean it with a chemical solution to remove fingerprints and then disposed of it by throwing it into a garbage container. All the while, John continues to insist that he did not kill Kent. After the hearings, Michele was sent to a women's prison in Alaska, where she awaited sentencing. She was eventually sentenced to 99 years in prison. During this time, Michele's husband frequently traveled to Alaska to visit her, striving to support both her and their family. 2 years later, Michele's attorney successfully overturned her first-degree murder conviction, A significant development arose when John Carlin, who had been beaten to death in a Lodge prison fight in 2008, while his appeal was still pending, became central to the case since Michelle's conviction had been primarily based on John's testimony. The court dismissed the case following his death. This marked a turning point in Michelle's favor on February 5, 2010. The Alaska Court of Appeals overturned Michelle's conviction. While awaiting a retrial, Michelle was released on $250 bail. During the retrial, the prosecution was prohibited from referencing her previous conviction, the movie, or the victim's letters, as these were deemed speculative. As a result, the case against Michelle began to look much weaker. Kent's parents attended the hearings and were shocked to learn of Michelle's release on December 13, 2011. Anchorage Superior Court Judge Philip Volland dismissed the murder charge against Michelle. Due to the prosecution's inability to prove her guilt, Michelle resumed her life in Washington, where she now runs a laser surgery clinic after John Carlin's death in prison. His son filed a lawsuit against the state of Alaska and received $160 in compensation for his father's death. Kent's father passed away in 2014, but Kent's mother continues to visit Alaska. She considers it the only place where she feels close to her son and remains committed to seeking justice. Each visit, however, reminds her of the guilt she feels for being unable to fulfill Kent's final wish, as described in his letters. In the end, no one was ever held accountable for Kent's murder. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Christopher Wilder. Some criminals leave a lasting mark on the criminal world, not only due to their brutality, but also because of the sophisticated methods they use to cover up their crimes. Today's story is about a series of mysterious murders that once shook America. Where dreams become nightmares, Elizabeth Kenyon, a 23-year-old aspiring model, had big dreams. She competed as a finalist in a beauty pageant in Florida, unfortunately. Her beautiful journey was tragically cut short on March 5, 1984. Elizabeth disappeared without a trace, worried. Her parents immediately contacted the Miami police to report her missing. However, as is often the case, the authorities downplayed their concerns. Claiming there was no need to worry yet, they suggested Elizabeth might be out celebrating her pageant success with friends or a boyfriend. The police advised the family to wait 24 hours before filing an official missing persons report. But her parents knew this wasn't like Elizabeth. She wasn't the type to party and always made sure to inform others of her plans. A day passed, but the police still made no move to solve her disappearance. Her mother, however, had a strong feeling that something terrible had happened to her daughter. Ultimately, her parents decided to hire a private investigator, together with Elizabeth's parents. The detective visited the apartment Elizabeth had been renting, hoping to uncover any clues. After searching the apartment, they found two notable items: an address book and a photo album. The album contained several pictures of Elizabeth's friends, while a small note inside detailed her schedule for the day she went missing. The note mentioned a planned meeting with a photographer at a specific address. When the investigator followed up on the lead, the building concierge confirmed seeing Elizabeth on the day she disappeared. She had been accompanied by a man. The detective soon discovered that the man she was scheduled to meet was Christopher Wilder, a 38-year-old who had been in a relationship with Elizabeth. Christopher had even proposed to her. But Elizabeth had declined, citing concerns about their age difference. On March 11, just 6 days after Elizabeth went missing, the detective contacted Christopher to ask him some questions about her disappearance. Christopher claimed he had no idea where Elizabeth might be. The detective then arranged an in-person meeting with Christopher. During their calm conversation, Christopher showed the detective some of his photography. Nothing incriminating or suspicious surfaced, except for one particular photo of Elizabeth in the image. She appeared visibly frightened, which the seasoned detective found unusual. Christopher explained that they had only done a short photo session on the day in question, after which Elizabeth supposedly left with an unidentified man. Still, the detective decided to investigate Christopher further. Christopher Wilder was born on March 13, 1945, in Sydney, New South Wales, to an Australian mother, June Wilder, and an American father, Coley Chapman Wilder. Who was a naval officer, Christopher was the oldest of 4 sons. His life was challenging from the start. Christopher was nearly stillborn and is believed to have nearly drowned in a swimming pool at the age of 2. These incidents were only the beginning of his troubled life. On January 4, 1963, when Christopher was 17, he and 2 friends had abused and assaulted a 13-year-old girl at a quarry, while all 3 denied involvement. Christopher was sentenced to probation. He later claimed that he underwent electroshock therapy as part of a rehabilitation program. Some experts speculated that this treatment could have been a traumatic experience, potentially worsening his mental state and contributing to his later violent behavior. However, no concrete evidence of this therapy has ever been found. It's also possible that Christopher fabricated this story to justify his actions. A journalist even suggested that another claim about nearly drowning in a swimming pool was also false. As Christopher's parents did not confirm it, these accounts may have been Christopher's attempts to gain sympathy. In 1968, Christopher got married, but his wife left him after just 1 week. The incident occurred after Christopher was arrested on suspicion of multiple abuse offenses at Manly Beach, Australia, following their divorce. His ex-wife informed the authorities that she believed Christopher had attempted to seduce her mother and another relative shortly after their marriage. She also discovered photographs of women in lingerie in his work briefcase and car, suggesting an obsessive fixation on women. Additionally, she suspected that he had twice attempted to strangle her during intimate moments, possibly with the intent to kill her in November of the same year. Christopher used the sensitive photos to blackmail a nursing student in Australia into having intimate relations with him, although the woman reported the incident to the police. The case was dropped because she refused to testify later. She revealed that her fear of retaliation from Christopher, whom she already perceived as unstable, had prevented her from coming forward. After emigrating to the United States, Christopher began a new chapter in his life, one that would eventually lead to his dark crimes. A resourceful. He entered the real estate business and achieved notable success, amassing a substantial fortune. With his newfound wealth, he purchased a luxurious waterfront mansion in the prestigious Boynton Beach area, located 25 miles south of Palm Beach. Along with a Porsche 911 and a boat, Christopher also developed a passion for car racing, participating in the Miami Grand Prix and embracing an extravagant lifestyle. During this period, he frequently vacationed in Hawaii and the Bahamas. It was also during this time that he developed a strong interest in photography. He invested in high-end photography equipment to enhance the quality of his work and even converted a room in his mansion into a darkroom to fully immerse himself in the hobby. However, he was driven by other impulses, vastly different from art. Between 1971 and 1975, Christopher repeatedly became the focus of investigations related to abuse offenses. On one occasion, he lured a young woman into his pickup truck under the pretense of photographing her for a modeling agency. Of course, this was a lie, and the girl became a victim of brutal abuse, despite numerous allegations from his victims. Christopher was never held accountable for his crimes. In 1977, a psychiatrist who evaluated him concluded that he was mentally ill. The psychiatrist considered him dangerous, recommended that he remain under constant medical supervision and participate in a specialized treatment program, according to the expert. Christopher harbored an obsessive desire to dominate women, degrade them to the level of slaves, and inflict pain and injuries, however. The psychiatrist's conclusions did not result in any legal consequences, and Christopher was acquitted by the jury on April 13, 1980. A 17-year-old girl named Carla Hendry from Beverly, Massachusetts, escaped from an attack and provided law enforcement with details about the perpetrator's vehicle, however. No action was taken in 1982 while visiting his parents in Australia. Christopher was accused of an abuse offense involving two 15-year-old girls from Manly. He had lured them to a remote area and forced them to pose sensitively. Thankfully, the girls were not seriously harmed and were able to identify him. Leading to his arrest, Christopher's parents posted bail for him, and he was even permitted to return to Florida while awaiting his legal proceedings, which were scheduled for April 1984 during the investigation of Elizabeth's case. Authorities uncovered a connection to another case, just 7 days before Elizabeth disappeared. A 20-year-old woman named Rosario Teresa Gonzalez went missing during the Miami Grand Prix. Christopher, a racing enthusiast, had attended the event. Rosario, a model working for a marketing company, had been handing out flyers and promotional items at the event. She vanished shortly after the race. It was later revealed that she had agreed to a photography session with Christopher, who had driven off in his Porsche. The circumstances strongly suggested that Christopher was involved in the disappearances of both women. On March 12, 1984, Elizabeth's parents sought help from an FBI special agent specializing in homicide investigations at the Miami office. Frustrated by law enforcement's lack of interest in the case, the family hired a private investigator and reached out to the Miami Herald to raise public awareness about Elizabeth's disappearance, hoping to provoke a response from the suspected abductor. On March 16, 1984, the newspaper published an article claiming significant progress in the investigation. Though it did not mention Christopher by name, the article briefly described the suspect as an Australian, a race car driver, and an amateur photographer. The intention was to prompt a reaction from Christopher. Law enforcement finally began paying closer attention to these cases after the publicity surrounding them. When agents reviewed the evidence, they quickly noticed a suspicious link between the two missing women, Elizabeth and Rosario, and their scheduled photography sessions with a man named Christopher. A background check revealed that Christopher had a long history of legal issues in Australia. At the time, he was on probation for an abuse charge and awaiting a new trial. This discovery gave the FBI grounds to open a full investigation on March 20, around the same time. They received a report from Linda Grover, 19, about an attempted kidnapping. Linda described being attacked by a man who tried to abduct her, seemingly intending to keep her captive or abuse her as a slave. Thankfully, she managed to escape. Her description of the attacker matched Christopher exactly. An FBI agent immediately interviewed Linda. She said, while she was working, a man approached her, complimented her appearance, and offered her a modeling opportunity, claiming to be a fashion photographer. He invited her to his car to view his portfolio. Linda declined and walked away, but the man persisted. He followed her in his car, urging her to go to a park with him for a quick photo session. Promising to pay her $25, Linda refused again and went into the store. When Linda stepped outside, the man approached her again, although he appeared friendly. She sensed a sinister presence about him that made her uncomfortable. She scanned the area for anyone who might help if needed. But the place was deserted. Christopher tried to convince her to join him for a photo shoot, opening his car to show her fashion magazines. This all occurred in broad daylight in a public setting. Suddenly, Christopher struck Linda on the head, knocking her unconscious. When Linda woke up, she was immobilized and lying in the back seat of a car. She began crying, which enraged Christopher. He stopped the car, taped her mouth shut with duct tape, and forced her into the trunk. He then drove to Glen Oaks Motel. Once there, he stuffed her into a sack. Restricting her movement entirely, Christopher glued her eyelids shut with super glue, tied her up, and abused her to hours of torture. Using a stun weapon to shock her whenever she resisted, his cruelty convinced Linda that she wouldn't survive. However, at one point, when Christopher became distracted, Linda managed to free herself and hide in the bathroom. She banged on the walls and screamed for help as loudly as she could. The noise scared Christopher, and he fled later. When an FBI agent showed Linda photographs of Christopher, she trembled and confidently identified him as her abductor. Linda eventually became a key witness in the case. However, the investigation progressed very slowly. Within a week, Linda had to leave the state out of fear for her safety. She was placed under FBI protection and relocated to a secret location. Law enforcement soon realized they were dealing with a violent and dangerous individual linked to multiple crimes. It took her more than 30 years to recover from the trauma she suffered. During that time, Linda earned a doctoral degree and frequently spoke to the media, sharing the story of her miraculous escape at the time of her abduction. Linda didn't fully comprehend how fortunate she was to survive, despite her fear. She was determined to ensure the criminal was imprisoned for a long time. Meanwhile, authorities needed more evidence to charge Christopher with the abductions of Rosario and Elizabeth. Police secured a search warrant for Christopher's home and arrived with FBI agents. They broke down the door and found the house empty. Christopher had fled days earlier. A massive manhunt was launched to locate him. Investigators thoroughly searched the house, but Christopher had meticulously cleaned it, leaving behind no fingerprints or evidence. Interviews with neighbors revealed that Christopher had disappeared immediately after the Glen Oaks Motel incident, likely realizing the police were closing in and would soon come for him. On March 23rd, in Canaveral Groves, the body of 21-year-old Teresa Ann Ferguson was found. She had last been seen at a shopping mall with a man resembling Christopher. Investigators discovered that Teresa had been beaten with a blunt object and then strangled to death. The method of the attack matched Christopher's profile, raising the victim count to 4. FBI agents concluded they were dealing with a serial killer and feared he could strike again at any moment. Immediate action was critical that same day. Alarming news arrived the day before the raid on Christopher's home. He had been seen at a local bank withdrawing a large amount of cash. This was a serious setback because it meant he now had the resources to travel across the country, pay in cash, and avoid detection with a 24-hour head start. He could already be anywhere before. On March 21, Christopher was seen in Texas, specifically in the parking lot of Lamar University in Beaumont. Witnesses reported that he was speaking with a young woman named Terry Diane Walden, a nursing student who was married and had 2 children. Christopher tried to lure her with an offer for a photo shoot, a tactic he often used. But Terry politely declined. Thankfully, he did not forcefully abduct her at that moment, sparing her life for the time being. However, this safety was short-lived. Later, at a supermarket, Christopher, essentially waiting for Terry, approached her again. He repeated his photo shoot offer. This time, in a more menacing tone, Terry refused once more. But Christopher was determined. He followed her through the store and into the parking lot, where he struck her on the head and abducted her. The FBI issued statements as they pursued this dangerous criminal, but he always seemed to stay about 2 days ahead of them. According to agents from the Miami office, a press release was issued describing Christopher's car, which he had used to kidnap Terry, unfortunately. The car was a common model, and without a license plate number, the information was not very helpful. Terry's profile was distributed across the country, but the slower communication technology of the time delayed the spread of alerts. The FBI had no choice but to follow the grim trail of bodies Christopher left behind on March 25th. At Penn Square Shopping Mall in Oklahoma City, he abducted 21-year-old Suzanne Wendy Logan. He then drove her to a motel in Newton, Kansas, the next morning. After breakfast, he took her to Milford Reservoir, where he stabbed her to death and left her body there. 2 days later, a fisherman discovered her body. The investigation revealed she had been tortured, abused, and murdered in a particularly horrific manner on March 28th. The FBI received a promising lead on Christopher when they discovered he had rented a hotel room in Colorado using a stolen credit card. This allowed authorities to track his movements. However, officers only learned about this payment the day after the room was booked. Acting quickly, all available police officers, along with FBI agents, rushed to the motel to apprehend Christopher, but he was already gone, although their efforts narrowed the gap in their pursuit to about 1 day. It provided little reassurance, as Christopher's direction of travel remained unknown. Christopher's next sighting occurred at a shopping mall in Grand Junction, Colorado, where he was seen talking to an 18-year-old woman named Cheryl Lynn Bonaventura. Witnesses later observed the two together at a diner, where they mentioned plans to travel to Las Vegas around March 31st. Christopher attacked Cheryl near the Kanab River in Utah. Her body was discovered on May 3rd. This incident led law enforcement to identify malls as his preferred locations for targeting victims. Christopher portrayed himself as a polished and credible individual, dressing in elegant suits and grooming his mustache and beard meticulously. He carried business cards, wore a large diamond ring on the pinky of his left hand, a gold Rolex watch, and a Pentax camera slung over his shoulder. Creating the image of a successful and respectable man, he used his charm and the pretense of being a professional photographer, searching for aspiring models to lure his victims, while also disarming the suspicions of security personnel and mall staff. Despite law enforcement distributing his photos and descriptions to shopping malls and supermarkets nationwide, Christopher continued moving across the country in search of new victims. On April 1st, Christopher Wilder's next victim was Michelle Lynn Korfman, a 17-year-old girl abducted at Meadows Shopping Mall in Las Vegas. Christopher had attended a photography event at the mall, where he approached Michelle and offered her an opportunity to become his first professional model. When the FBI learned about the incident and began investigating the mall, they collected photographs from event attendees, some of which showed Michelle with Christopher. Several images captured him selecting her as his target and following her. Michelle's body was discovered on May 11th, according to forensic analysis results. Her abductor had restrained and tortured her over an extended period. He sealed her mouth and eyes with superglue, abused her, and inflicted deep cuts while she was still alive. The wounds, approximately 3 centimeters deep, were not fatal, but caused her immense pain. The hunt continued. On April 4, 16-year-old Tina Marie Rizzico from California became Christopher's next victim. She had gone to a shopping mall in search of a summer job, hoping to save enough money to buy a new car to replace the old one her father had given her. At the mall, Christopher approached her, complimented her appearance, and offered her $100 in cash for a photo shoot, hoping to earn some extra money. Tina agreed. They went to a nearby park, where she willingly posed, expecting to receive her payment. However, Christopher suddenly pulled out a weapon and forced her into his car. She had no choice but to comply. Christopher drove Tina to a motel in San Diego, where she was subjected to hours of brutal torture. He cut her with a knife, electrocuted her, beat her, and alternated these horrific acts with abuse assault when Tina disappeared. The FBI issued a special bulletin and held a press conference. By this time, Christopher Wilder had become the most wanted fugitive in the United States. Tina was his seventh known victim. With at least 6 others already confirmed, Christopher's name and crimes were being discussed on television, in newspapers, and on the radio. The FBI hoped this extensive media coverage would lead to his capture. In the spring of 1984, the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. Despite their efforts, Tina remained missing. Authorities hoped she might still be alive, but in reality, she was enduring unimaginable suffering. On the 6th day of captivity, Christopher told Tina he would set her free if she helped him lure in his next victim. Desperate to survive, Tina agreed. Christopher had already chosen his next target, Dawnette Sue Wilt, a young woman who worked part-time handing out flyers in supermarkets. He forced Tina to pretend she was looking for work in order to convince Dawnette to get into his car. The plan worked, and several witnesses reported seeing an unknown man leaving an Indiana shopping center with 2 women. The man's description matched Christopher, whose face was now widely recognized across the country, despite promising Tina her freedom. Christopher refused to release her and forced her to watch as his victims endured horrifying torture. On April 12, 1984, Christopher, along with his hostages, saw a news report in which Tina's mother pleaded for her daughter's life. This triggered a panic attack in Christopher, something that had been happening more frequently. In a frantic state, he left the motel with his captives. Later, in a forest, Christopher attempted to kill Dawnette. After enduring days of torture, Dawnette was so desperate that she begged him to kill her. Christopher stabbed her twice with a knife due to severe blood loss and the sedatives he had been administering. Dawnette lost consciousness, believing she was dead. Christopher abandoned her. Amazingly, Dawnette survived the nightmare. She regained consciousness, tried to make her way to the nearest road, where a driver found her and helped her. Christopher returned to the spot where he had left Dawnette to confirm her death. But when he discovered she was no longer there, he panicked. Based on Dawnette's testimony, FBI agents determined that the suspect was heading toward the Canadian border. Investigators discovered he was driving a car stolen from Terry. The vehicle was soon found abandoned. Christopher managed to escape once again. He was next spotted at a shopping center in Victor, New York, where he targeted a 30-year-old woman named Beth Elaine Dodge to steal her Pontiac Firebird, again with Tina's assistance. Christopher took Beth to the woods and killed her. He did not abuse or torture Beth. He only wanted her car. After this cold-blooded murder, Christopher unexpectedly released Tina, even giving her money so she could return home. Tina became a crucial witness, providing detailed accounts of the horrors she endured during her captivity. FBI agents learned that Christopher had friends in Canada whom he had visited periodically before his crime spree, law enforcement was convinced he was heading to them with his newly stolen car. Christopher had gained a significant lead over the agents. Authorities believed he was already en route to the border. In response, all available police forces were mobilized, and law enforcement agencies were alerted to the threat posed by Christopher. On April 13, Christopher stopped at a service station in Colebrook, New Hampshire, near the Canadian border. Two state police officers at the scene recognized him as a dangerous criminal from distributed bulletins. As the officers carefully observed him, Christopher noticed their presence. He ran to his car and armed himself with a weapon. One of the officers attempted to tackle him from behind, leading to a struggle in which his weapon discharged twice. The first bullet hit Christopher, penetrating his back, while the second caused a fatal chest injury. The officer accidentally attacked himself, despite suffering serious injuries. The officer survived, underwent a long recovery, and later returned to duty as a celebrated hero who had stopped a killer capable of taking more lives. During a search of Christopher's car, police discovered a copy of the book The Collector by John Fowles. The novel tells the story of a man who kidnaps and imprisons a woman in a basement. Eventually leading to her death, authorities believe Christopher was inspired by this book and saw it as a model for his crimes. The serial killer was later cremated in Florida, leaving behind an estate valued at over $7 million that same year. The court ordered taxes to be deducted from the estate, with the remaining funds distributed among the families of his victims. Several previous cases allegedly involving Christopher Wilder are also mentioned. On May 29, 1982, near a property owned by Christopher, a bag containing the skeletal remains of 17-year-old Tina Marie Beebe was discovered. Tina's sister revealed that before her disappearance, Tina had planned to attend a photo shoot after being invited by a photographer. Similarly, 20-year-old aspiring model Sherry Lynn Ball disappeared on June 27, 1983, in Boca Raton, Florida. After leaving for a photo shoot, her badly decomposed body was discovered 3 months later by a hunter in Shelby, New York. 18-year-old Tammy Lynn Leppert, an aspiring model, vanished in Florida following a heated argument with a man resembling Christopher Wilder, Tammy's mother, who had been actively supporting her modeling career, claimed that Christopher and Tammy had met during a film casting session. During this meeting, Christopher reportedly asked to photograph Tammy, but she refused. 15-year-old Colleen Emily Osborne went missing after leaving her home in Daytona Beach, Florida, on March 15, 1984. That day, she missed her school bus, skipped classes to go to the beach, and never returned home. On April 6, 1984, her partially buried body was found near a lake in Orange County, Florida. Investigators later uncovered that Christopher Wilder had stayed at a nearby motel on the same day as her disappearance. One of Colleen's classmates reported seeing a man resembling Christopher at their school. Scouting for models, the man had offered $100 to a girl willing to pose for him, but Colleen declined. Christopher Wilder is remembered as one of the most notorious serial killers in the United States. Infamously known by the nicknames the Beauty Queen Killer and the Snapshot Killer, the bodies of Rosario and Elizabeth were never recovered. It has been confirmed that he kidnapped 12 women and murdered 9 of them. Authorities also suspect his involvement in several other similar crimes in the United States and Australia during that period.